evening, everyone. Welcome to the regular council meeting of December 18th. Hawthorne, Squamish, Priest, Squamish, Owaimeo. Welcome to the traditional territory of the Squamish Nation. We have an amended agenda in front of us, Council. A motion to remove the amended agenda, moved by Councillor French, seconded by Councillor Race. All those in favor? Opposed? Motion carries. Any notice of motion? We do not have any delegations this evening. Any consideration of unscheduled public attendance? So this would be anyone who has an issue that they feel can't wait for the next regular council meeting. Seeing none, we do have a scheduled item tonight, and that is reconsideration of DP 460. So I'm bringing this back for just a sense of procedural fairness in reviewing the meeting tape of that evening and in conversation with Councillor Race, who was the acting mayor at that time. I felt that there was some confusion about what was to be considered as part of this DP, what council could or could not do with the variances. And so I felt, just out of fairness to the proponent and to council, because many of you are new and this is not intuitive, some of this stuff, you have to learn it, that it was, better for all of us if we brought this back. Just we're more clear about the options in front of council. This is not meant to be a prejudgment on the outcome that was decided at the previous meeting, but merely an opportunity to be a transparent, fair process for everyone involved. As mayor, I can bring back the motion, but in order to have a hearing, we need to postpone reconsideration so that we can go through the staff presentation and also hear from the public. So I'd like to move that we postpone reconsideration of the DP motion until after the hearing. Seconded by Councillor Stoner. All those in favor? Opposed? Motion carries. So we'll now turn over to staff for the presentation. And then council will do your questions. And we'll hear from the public, and at that point, I will put the motion on the floor.
Thank you, Mayor. My name is Jonas Wilnischkes, Director of Community Planning, and with me today is also Gary Buxton, the General Manager of Community Planning and Infrastructure. So I've got a brief presentation on the reconsideration for 1002 Enterprise Place Development Permit 460, which is a form and character development permit with variances. So just a brief background for the public and council. The development permit was last considered November 20th. The motion to authorize the development permit with variances failed. There were some questions regarding the status of the business license and the ability of council to deal with variances individually that we thought we would follow up on. And the memo on the agenda addresses those two items. So following the failed motion, council did pass a motion to reconsider the application, and so we sent out a round of notices again to all the adjacent property owners within 100 meters of that property. So in terms of the business license status and the variances, so I can again confirm that the outdoor storage use of the site was always legitimate, had a business license on it. There was some confusion when the parcel was sold, whether the business license stayed there or went with another business. However, that's irrelevant. What is relevant is that the outdoor storage did have a business license. The use of storage within containers did not, and that use is ongoing today. So that is the use that lacks a business license, that we still haven't approved a business license and is pending the decision of council. The question on whether council can consider variances individually, the answer is yes, council can consider variances individually. However, some variances have an impact on the site layout of this development proposal. So there are a few variances in here, such as irrigation requirements in the zoning bylaw and the paving of the surface of the property that would not impact the site layout. And then there are other variances such as parking requirements, loading requirements, and bike parking requirements, all of which would likely have an impact on the development permit layout, and so it would affect the development permit. So if council did consider that there was merit in approving the development permit, but did not agree with the variances requested, those specific 3 variances, then I think the proper approach would be to refer it back to staff so we can work out with the applicant the variances. Council also has always the option of just denying the variances as well, in which case the development permit is unapprovable because it doesn't meet the zoning bylaw requirements. So just a quick overview. Here's the property highlighted on the aerial image on Enterprise Place. The zoning is light industrial. It's within development permit area 6 in the business park. And again, this application is being reviewed under the previous OCP development permit area guidelines because it arrived before the OCP was adopted. This is just a site plan showing the layout of the buildings and the drive aisles. So it's a storage facility. These are flat packed steel storage containers. The total area is around 14,000 square feet. It has an electrical vertical lift gate with access code. There's a water right-of-way for a water main along the west side of the property line. The proposal includes 5 parking stalls, gravel surface, so no paved surfacing, landscape features that are drought tolerant, hardy plants and evergreen shrubs, and the large existing cottonwood tree is to remain at the front of the property. The storage use is a transition from open space, which was long-standing use on the property, to storage containers. Application again was received prior to the OCP being adopted, and prior to the bylaw that now requires any new storage facilities to essentially rezone before they are permitted. So the zoning bylaw only permits it on properties where the storage is already legally ongoing. So the application was in accordance with the previous zoning bylaw and the OCP. In terms of development permit area guidelines, DPA 6 has very few guidelines. It's a historic relic and also tailored to having a kind of a lesser standard performing character in industrial areas. So it controls site location. The proposal has a small frontage, which results in limited visibility from the street. It's also not on one of the main streets. The proponents are proposing to improve the street frontage with landscape plantings and a new vehicle gate. And this has changed since council's seen it at the November 20th meeting, in that we now have an image of what this gate would look like. Before it was an example. So it generally meets the development permit area 6 guidelines in the business park. Again, the standards are considered lesser here because it's not on the main street, and also the street frontage is very limited. The proponents are proposing to paint the ends of the storage containers vibrant yellow color to provide some visual interest. And the landscape on front and existing large boulevard tree largely screens development from the street. So I'm just listing the 5 variances that are requested. The top 3 variances do have an impact on site layout. And then variances 4 and 5, which deal with surfacing and irrigation, do not have an impact on site layout. In terms of legislative authority, so development permit area guidelines, as long as the development meets these, if it was just a straight development permit with no variances, there would be an entitlement to a permit. However, DPs can include variances, and variances can be considered individually. However, some have an impact, as I previously stated. At the last meeting, council talked about potentially establishing a condition that would require this use to be discontinued after a certain amount of time. And I can confirm that if that is the case, we would need agreement from the applicant with those conditions. Otherwise, the conditions may not be valid. There's been some discussion at the last meeting, and also we've gotten a letter about the floodplain management bylaw compliance. I just want to note that the issue of floodplain management on this site is 100% delegated to staff, and we're administering under the floodplain management bylaw. So in terms of this proposal, it's about form and character and the nature of the variances, like parking, surfacing, and irrigation of landscaping. Really, the public discussion should be about those issues rather than the floodplain bylaw, because there's no request here to vary the floodplain bylaw or to provide any sort of exemption. So there's been a number of public comments received to date. The applicants have originally provided a letter of support, of no objection, with signatures from the surrounding property owners. Since the reconsideration was issued, we've gotten 2 letters of support, and I believe a few letters of opposition from the neighboring or other storage providers in the business park. The concerns of the other storage facility owners are the maximum number of buildings, the flood construction level requirements, interest to expand storage facilities on other sites if this is permitted here, as well as concerns that an additional facility is going to be permitted in the business park. We really appreciate council's questions in advance of the meeting, and so we did get a few. One of them was, can council consider the development permit separately from the variances? And yes, the answer is you can. However, if it has an impact on the development permit, it's unapprovable because it doesn't meet the zoning bylaw. Should public comments focus on variances or form and character of the DP? So yes, they should focus on the variance requests, which are the parking, the irrigation, and the surfacing. And then, can council establish a condition as part of the variance approval to limit the timing of the storage use? Yes, however, the applicants need to agree to that condition in order for it to be valid.
Jonas, under that scenario, it would be referred back to staff.
We've had some discussions with the applicant following the last meeting in terms of what would be an agreeable term for the applicant, and I believe if they have an opportunity, they will speak to that tonight as well. So we're at the recommendation, and I don't have to read it out, but staff recommendation is to approve the development permit as it is applied with variances. And the rationale for the variances is that it does keep the site in a more temporary state than we would otherwise have if this was a full-on storage facility with surface parking and loading. And we do have a history of providing variances to storage facilities for parking and loading because they make sense, because it's not a intensive parking and loading type of use. The other variances like the paving and the irrigation just mean that this site is in a more temporary state and that there's a bigger chance that it will get redeveloped to another industrial use later on.
Now or after the questions? Okay. So I will go to council for questions, but I'm just going to read this first. The proponent and members of the public will be given the opportunity to be heard or to present written submissions respecting the following requested variances to the District of Squamish zoning bylaw. Off-street parking, 12 spaces are required and 5 spaces are proposed. A variance of 7 stalls is being sought. Off-street loading, 2 loading spaces are required and 9 loading spaces are proposed. A variance of 2 loading spaces is requested. Sorry, did that make sense?
Should be 0.
Should be 0.
Yes, 0. The requirement is for 2 and
Right.
the proposal is 0.
2 loading spaces are required and 0 loading spaces are proposed. A variance of 2 loading spaces is requested. Bicycle parking, 3 Class A bike spaces and 6 Class B bike spaces are required. No bike parking is proposed. A variance of 9 bike spaces is requested. parking space surface design. The zoning bylaw requires that parking stalls are surfaced with permanent hard surface. A gravel parking surface is proposed. Provision of irrigation. Irrigation is required in section 4.27 of the zoning bylaw. No irrigation is proposed. I will go to council for questions, but when I go to the public after I've confirmed that it's your turn to speak, please approach the podium and commence your remarks by clearly stating your name and address. Please note that speakers will be given a maximum of 5 minutes to address council. So with that, I will turn it over to council for their questions, and then I'll open it to the public. So please, this is questions only, not opinion giving at this point. Any questions, council? Councilor Pettigrew.
So there's been various comments about, why is this proponent allowed to do this and I wasn't allowed to do that. And so I understand there's been various changes to the bylaws over time, and we're trying to evaluate these in the rules at the time. Can you just speak to how we have or haven't adhered to our bylaws at various points in time, and if other proponents wanted to do things outside of the current bylaws, were they given opportunities for variances, or just, can you explain that a little bit?
Yes, so we did have discussions with a number of property owners who, when the word came out that the district was looking at reducing the number of storage facilities that would be permitted in the future, had interest in developing. And we had the same discussions with everyone who was interested in terms of what would be district requirements at that time. But every single application is a little different. I don't think we had another application that was on an empty or mostly empty lot. They were kind of other discussions we had were about additions to a use that was ongoing. So expansion of the use, and we talked about what would be the requirements. In some cases, the properties would be in a more visible location. So again, it depends the level of standard in terms of where you are in the business park and what's on the property already. But I think we had fair discussions with everybody. I don't think obviously we were not encouraging any one of these property owners to apply for an application. And I think the standards that we communicated that would have to be met were level across the board. This application was, I believe, the only one that proceeded with the application after those discussions.
Other questions, council?
Thank you. My recollection is I understand this is being evaluated under the previous OCP design guidelines. My recollection, last time I actually had them with me, my old copy, which I've unfortunately now thrown out, but my recollection was one of the guidelines was avoiding monotonous lines or appearance, or words to that effect.
Yes.
And that wasn't in your presentation. Could you confirm that?
Yes,
or not?
I think I know the guideline Council Race is referring to. So it is the siding, massing, shape, pattern, roofline, and exterior finish of buildings should be sufficiently varied to avoid a monotonous landscape.
That's the one, thank you.
That's
and that
right.
is from the previous OCP that we're evaluating this under.
Yes.
Thank you.
Just as we're coming up to budget and thinking about resourcing and so on, I understand this has been in the pipe for about 21 months. Can you just speak to why that sort of length of timeline? Does that imply a need for different policy or more resourcing, or?
Well,
No.
the question should be about the variance, and about the DP. So how does this relate to the variances?
Well, I guess what I'm sort of struggling with is some degree of fairness and understanding that the process and where that lands us, and maybe we need to adjust something. I'm not sure.
But possibly not relevant to tonight's discussion. Any other questions? Okay. I'll open the floor up to the public. Would the proponent like to speak?
Yes.
Board, state your name and address.
Steve Broom, My address is 1511 McDonald Place. I'd just like to say thanks to Mayor and Council for the opportunity to bring this back for reconsideration. For those of you who don't know me, I'm a civil contractor and I've been working and helping build Squamish for close to 40 years. I've contracted to many private developers as well as a lot of small and large District of Squamish infrastructure projects. I've also donated a lot of my time and money to making and keeping Squamish as beautiful as the town I grew up in. Right back to picking up sticks with my soccer team for the grading of Brennan Park fields, to donating machines and trucks for Squamish Cleanup Day, or sitting on the infrastructure committee for years. I've always been a proud and huge advocate of attracting new people and businesses to our little town. When I started in business in the early 80s, the business community saw this place as no growth. It was just bureaucratic and opposed to new business and ideas. It stayed like that for years until about 2004 when things finally started to change, but only on paper and in slogans. This council was elected when many of you and others running for council had change as a key campaign platform. And among that was to encourage startups, innovative small businesses, and incubators. This time we really are open for business. There are some very big projects which will have large impacts on traffic, services, and environment. Those large projects deserve and need close detailed review by council and staff. It may take a year or more, and we all want to be careful with those big projects. Paul Reynolds and I are part of something unique. We found an innovative way to use industrial land on a transitional basis. This is land on which I've been paying high taxes for years with just open storage. We are transitioning it to a permanent business investment. Until we have approval of our DP, we're only using a small part of the stop and store technology. Ours is a small project on a small cul-de-sac in a corner of the industrial park. Why would it need so much time to be reviewed and approved? The sign says we're open for business. What are we really saying? We want small business to try something new and temporary, but are we going to live up to that pledge? Why is it so hard to get permission? We want to invest here. Why would council not support the work done by the design advisory panel who supported our application? On very large or complex projects, of course, the advisory panel report will be scrutinized. We all want that for big projects which will impact Squamish for decades to come. But should council second guess them for such small projects in the back corner of an industrial zone? The panel is volunteers, engineers, architects, planners, and such. How do they feel if their support of a small project gets chewed up? Staff have gone into such detail before this got to council that at the last meeting your staff was being second guessed as to things like loading spaces, beautification, and even paint. As a lifelong citizen of Squamish, I want to see us support smaller scale experiments, support innovation, and support non-permanent creative use of space. Let the marketplace decide if they work. Let the people of Squamish have a chance to say what they need and what they will pay for. Please support small local business by approving this modest project. Thanks.
My name is Paul Reynolds. I live in Marine Drive in White Rock. I am the President, CEO of Stop and Store, which is in partnership with Steve on this project. And also we manage the site on behalf of the applicant. I want to talk about a few of the points that we presented in our paper, but not to go over in any way all the points in our paper, nor even summarize some of those points, but a few of them which in the discussions we've had with staff and with members of council since the last meeting, it's clear that they perhaps need a little bit more explanation. And also some points for council to consider as they weigh the pros and cons, because there will be opposition speakers after us. So I'm going to talk about the origins of the project. It's the timing of our application, the duration of use, the environmental advantages, the flood restriction, although I will keep that brief in light of what staff has just explained, the size of the project, the jobs relating to it, and the factors that council members might wish to consider in weighing the pros and the cons. The first is that I think it's useful to look at how this started. It is correct to say, and we acknowledge this, that in putting up containers on the open storage yard, that turns out that it was in breach of the terms and conditions of the business license at the time. But we aren't cowboys. When we first approached Steve about collaboration, we set up 24 steel containers in one corner of his site. So we were using about maybe 15 or 20% of his site. It proved successful and it expanded from that. But how we started was we checked the land was zoned for storage. Over the years, Steve had many different customers put steel shipping containers onto the site. And indeed, on the day we first viewed the site, there were 2 shipping containers. There is a shipping container still today on the portion of the site that Steve still uses as open versus our container portion. Second, we'd already had discussions with Saanich, Merritt, Kelowna, and Penticton, and therefore we knew that many cities in BC, unlike Squamish, do not treat these types of containers as buildings, and they are permitted to be used on places zoned for open storage. When we talked to Coquitlam and Port Coquitlam, they said no. But the fact is that still today, not only are there such container sites in Squamish, they are in Vancouver, they are in Victoria, they are in lots of places. So we kind of believe, not unreasonably, that it was okay, that there were already shipping containers on the site and we were okay based on what we then knew. We also drove around and we saw other storage container sites in Squamish. In our paper that we provided last week to council, we enclosed photographs of 2 of the sites with containers that are still operating. And there are, in fact, 4 that we know of that use containers. So we assumed wrongly that we could do it and that we weren't being cowboys. We didn't intend to be cowboys, and we don't accept that we should be treated like we were cowboys. There was a reasonable basis for us to do what we were doing at the time. However, once staff told us that what we were doing was not allowed, or told Steve, we then applied for the current development permit. And that's just coincidence. It happened to be a month before the moratorium. But we did all the process. We've had 6 consultants working with us. I don't know how many times we've had meetings with staff. There must be 100 pieces of correspondence in the file. A lot of people have worked in good faith towards this goal. We're persistent and careful, and we're trying to do in a law-abiding fashion. So next I want to talk about the timing of our application. Planning laws and regulations change continually, and indeed in your agendas last time you were looking at changes and there was discussion. The relevant rules that apply to an applicant like us are the ones that are in effect on the date of the application. So in our case, it's way over a year since we applied, and rules are changed, have changed, and there will be, I'm sure, next year more rules change. But the law in Canada is that we should be reviewed and considered under the rules as they are at the time of the application. Garibaldi Storage thinks that it's unfair that you are even considering our application. They've said that in their letter. They're wrong. And I'd like to illustrate why. They have 3 self-storage sites in Squamish. The one next to ours has shipping containers and buildings on the site, and it is built approximately 3 feet above the street level. I'm not an engineer, I'm just eyeballing it. It was built some years ago, and I assume it was built according to the flood control zone rules relevant at the time that the buildings were built. Now, move forward to the last year. The Queensway project is about eyeballing it, looks to be 6 to 7 feet above street level. They've had to build up the site massively before they started to construct. Do they get to come to council or to the staff and say, why do we have to be 7 feet tall when Garibaldi storage was only 3 feet tall? Of course not, because they applied later. The rules at the time of their application were different than the rules whenever Garibaldi buildings were built.
Mr. Reynolds, so your 5 minutes are up.
I'm sorry, I cannot hear you.
Your 5 minutes are up. Everybody has 5 minutes. So are you close to the end of your?
I didn't know that, was
All right.
limited to 5 minutes.
Are you close to the end of your comments, or do you need more time?
I'm sorry?
Are you close to the end of your comments, or do you need more time?
I do ask for more time, please.
So could I ask you to take a step back? We'll let someone else speak, and then I'll bring you back to the podium to finish up.
Thank you.
Thank you. Is there anyone else that would like to speak? State your name and address, please.
My name is Sasha Fabry, 39885 Government Road, Squamish. Thank you so much, Mayor and Council, for the opportunity to come before you and speak, and for your time. I'm here representing Paul and April Turner from Black Tusk Storage, and we feel that for a number of reasons, the variances proposed before you today ought to be not allowed to move forward, and that the development permit as a whole, therefore, not move forward as well. There are very clearly variances being requested here that do not meet current bylaws. It's unfortunately well below floodplain lines, as the letter in front of you folks discusses, and the necessary applications required for the variance to be applied do not meet the criteria put in front of you folks. The parking has the possibility to influence various businesses around them, and I do have interested parties here in front of you today who did not, interestingly enough, receive the notice as they are within the 100 meters, and I'm sure that they'd like to speak to that later. The off-street loading as well. I think just to address a few of the concerns that were also just put forward by the proponents, I don't think that anyone is necessarily suggesting that they're cowboys here, and the argument that was just presented was that the applications should be reviewed as per the bylaws of the day, and I would entirely agree. I think that the bylaws for the floodplain should apply. I think that the parking should apply. I think that the bicycle parking should apply. I think that the variances put forward to you today completely dismiss that argument in the fact that there are a number of aspects to the application that are not acceptable here. And I'm happy to continue in conclusion after a few other people have spoken as well. Thank you very much.
Is there anyone else that would like to speak from the public? Come forward. Thank you, and just your name and address, please.
Hi, my name's Jinder Burr. I live at 40257 Aristotle Drive. I'm one of the owners of B&B Excavating, which own the adjacent property, it's 1003 Enterprise Place. And we've had issues with vehicles parked in front of our gate with the trucks were trying to come in and out over the last year. That's what our concerns with parking and stuff there. So a little about the street offload.
Thank you. Welcome.
Hey. Hello, I'm Rob Askew from Corporate Electric. I'm in the adjacent building. It's 1120 Enterprise Way. It's just beside this property. And the same thing with me is just I'm concerned about the parking. I have quite a few spots, quite a few guys in my building, and the parking is definitely one of the things that I thought was addressed, and that was for Steve's plan for, cost-effective storage is probably a good thing. But I think there's a few issues we got to address in that area. One of them being the parking is a big one for me. And then the taxes, if they're gonna play that as a business, want to see the business go through and be taxed the proper way. So, thank you.
Anybody else? Yes.
Good evening, Mayor and Council. My name is Larry Sunderland. I'm the owner of 39480 Queens Way. And I've written a letter, and I believe each of you have received it, and I'd just like that letter read into the record. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Simon. Is there someone else like to speak?
Gary McKay from 762 Crescent in North Vancouver. And I just want a bit of clarification. Is this for a temporary storage facility, or once they actually have the containers on site, will it then in the future be able to redevelop as a full-on storage facility?
I'll let you address that, Steph.
Yes, so once, if there's a development permit approved and issued for the site, any additional expansion or changes to the form and character would require another development permit, and that would not be possible because the extent of the use gets essentially locked down with this development permit because it is a legally non-conforming use. So the owners are able to apply for a permit, and once that's built, any additional expansion or changes have to then are assessed under the existing zoning that's in place.
Fair enough. And then we actually applied for similar, or we were in a similar situation in, I believe it was August 2016. And our understanding at the time was that we could only go for a relatively small, essentially the number of storage units that we were looking to put on place, or we had on place at that point. And we actually removed ours, the ones that didn't comply. We didn't understand that you could actually make an application to a full, and we did ask, and we did try to, I think we were limited to about 10%. And hence, we did sell our property on Queensway because of that. And the other one was that if it's within 100 meters, I think we have two self-storage sites that are, one's 80 meters away and the other is 70-some meters. I don't believe we got any notification.
So we did send notifications within 100 meters. We can
So
check
that would have
our
gone to both sites?
records.
The Garibaldi storage?
Yes, unless the property owner was identical.
Yeah, so
It would probably be one notification.
we didn't, I don't think we had any notification.
We can look into that.
Happy to look into that. The other question, again, like I said before, every site is different. Some sites have development already on them, and they take up site coverage, number of building spaces. So every site is assessed differently.
And our sites that were empty, that we put storage containers on, would be very similar to this. As opposed to the sites we have that have buildings on that we put storage containers on.
Again, I can't speak to the details
Anyway,
of those
that was-
applications
that's
because
why
it's
this
not in front of me.
We've got to speak to the variances in front of us.
Absolutely, no, perfect. Thank you.
Is there anyone else that would like to speak? I'll come back to you, Mr. Reynolds, or? Okay, hold on a second. We've got another speaker.
I'm being asked to come up. My name's Pierre Freely, 1021 Raven Drive, and I'm a local geohazard consultant. We were told not to speak to the flood issue, but I've been encouraged to. So,
Wait, we can't consider
it
this.
potentially taints the process to hit irrelevant material.
So, Mr. Freely, council can't consider
Yep, that's fine.
the flood bylaw in its decision making on this because it's delegated to staff in this case.
Correct. Okay, so I'll step down.
Thank you. Am I correct in saying that?
Yes, it would have to be somehow directly related to the variances that are requesting it.
Anyone else? Ms. Fabry.
Just a clarification question. Sorry, do you need me to say my name and address again?
No, we're good.
Correct me if I'm wrong, but I presume the floodplain bylaw was listed as one of the factors that would affect whether or not the variance would go forward. So I'm curious how that doesn't affect the application as a whole. Am I incorrect in assuming that?
Yes.
I see. Well, it's a straightforward answer.
Thank you for your question. Any other speakers before I go back? All right, Mr. Reynolds, please come forward. I'll give you another 5 minutes on the clock. And it's just really, it's a process piece to allow multiple speakers to speak. So if you need more than this 5 minutes, I'll just check again if there's any other speakers, and we'll come back to you. So
That's very kind. Thank you for the clarification. And I will confess, I'm not hearing almost any of the comments. I think the volume of the loudspeaker, so if I cross over something that's obviously somebody said, I apologize, I just didn't hear it. I have cut out some of the things I had written down to compress the time out of respect for what you just said. So with respect to the duration of the use, which I think would be a potentially very important part, we seek to add self-storage as a permitted use on the site, but we also have a very specific proposal to use containerized storage as a transition before applying brand new for another development permit at some years in the future on the same site. So the permanent use would not necessarily be storage. It's in an industrial zone, so the future application that Steve and I may make would depend on the market conditions and if somebody is interested to invest and we can build to suit for an industrial user. So for example, there is going to be a major, Mr. Sunderland's project is a major new expansion of self-storage in the area. So a few years from now, when we're near the end of our natural life as a transitional use, we would take a look at, as any businessman would, take a look at the market supply and demand, and we might say, well, there's too much storage or prices are falling, it's not economic for us to build another storage building. Let's look at finding an industrial user. But on the other hand, it may be that it is good for us. That would be our plan and our goal, is to have the option to do that. Now, in our paper to council, we suggested a limited duration was a possibility, because this was part of the discussion at the last meeting. And we are very willing to work out a solution with council and through staff. We had suggested in writing in the paper we submitted to council, a first option was a voluntary agreement not to replace units as they come to the end of their life. These units do have finite life. They're not like shipping containers, which have 25 years. These are much, much shorter. But there is another idea which we're tabling today, verbally, and that is an agreement to remove all of the containers all at once instead of parts of the containers as they reach the end of their life. And in that regard, I have to acknowledge that some of the units on the site are older units that we brought in from Saskatchewan, and they have a 9-year remaining life. So we could perhaps formally agree, voluntarily agree, to remove all the containers no later than 9 years after we get a building permit. And that would provide some clarity for council that this is truly a transitional use. We're committed as a practical business matter to a transitional shorter use. This is not a 50-year or 40-year project as a container project. So we're trying to show in making these two options to council a willingness to work with council and a willingness to agree a reasonable limitation, because that's, as a practical matter, always been our business intention. And to give it a number or a process that would be verifiable by staff on behalf of the city. I won't speak about the environmental uniqueness of the project. It basically is a wilderness-style project. What we bring in is what we get out. There was gravel and a fence. When we're done, there will be gravel and a fence. Everything comes out. That's not theoretical. We've done that twice in the last few years, and this year we shut down our Kelowna operation and moved it to Penticton. So when I say we can pack it up in 4 or 5 trucks, I'm talking about something we have done several times. The flood control restrictions, I think, are significant only in one point.
don't need to speak to those because they're not relevant to your.
Okay, thank you. Then my closing remark is there are some things that individual council members in our discussions, they like about the project, some that they have concerns with, and that's perfectly understandable. No project, including ours, comes as, my God, this is the best thing since sliced bread. But in evaluating how to vote, there are some things that people might be thinking of, that it's a lower cost option for consumers in a marketplace that there are other brighter, bigger, nicer storage places. Ours is a very basic model. It leaves land available for future development by higher industrial use. It's environmentally attractive. It's an innovative idea by local investors. That might be a great reason why you'd love this project. It has brought jobs to Squamish. It's taken people away from commuting up to Whistler or down to Vancouver for jobs. The cons that individual councillors might have in their mind is, won't some customers store things here that could be damaged by water? Or, I want a new building now, not years later. Or, is it fair to other storage operators? The 2 points, and these are our last 2 points to make about that. The first is, the very reason why there are laws and regulations on development is so that applicants like us can know the rules and what we have to meet. We had 6 consultants and lots of meetings with staff and the advisory panel. We are entitled to have a decision taken based on the rules that apply to everyone and not personal preferences or extraneous issues. For example, and this is only an example, if a councillor were to say to themselves, well, there's just too much storage, or there's going to be a lot of competition, that is absolutely crystal clear. That is an illegal basis for a decision and would void the decision of council. And I don't think that's going to happen. I just want to highlight that in general, the decision has to be taken based on the rules and conditions that apply, that we're trying to comply with and that staff has guided us to. And the final point is there are pros and cons. We recognize that not everything is attractive about our project. But Steve and I are real people. We're not a big company. These are people who want to invest. We're using innovation and we're being creative. The systems are being used and that we would like to use once we get a development permit are part of our US and Canadian patent applications. I'm not going to talk about them in detail here because it's proprietary and we have competitors here. It's interesting that the opponents in writing to our program are competitors. They are all way, way bigger than ours. The one that came in just a few hours ago to our attention is some 200,000 square foot of storage. We're talking about 14,000 square foot of storage. One facility. Garibaldi has 3 sites. I'm guessing that Black Tusk probably has 80,000+. What we're asking is the public policy that's overriding here is that Squamish is open for business. We are part of an innovative use of land. We want you to encourage small business. So in making your decision today, we ask you to please consider the overriding public policy is unless there's something radically wrong by the staff's recommendations and by the advisory committee, that you should approve the project. You think there's something radically wrong, I respect your right to decide that way. But I think you fundamentally have to say the staff got this wholly wrong or the advisory panel got it wrong. At the end of the day, we hope that you will vote to support what is a creative, innovative, temporary land use, and that Squamish really is open for business. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Mr. Reynolds. You did mention something in your comments that I would like Jonas to speak to, Mr. Valencius. You mentioned your options when it comes time to decide, and you mentioned maybe building a permanent facility for storage, and I'd like Jonas to clarify that that actually is not an option.
No, like I said, that wouldn't be an option. So the use that is approved, if it is approved by council now on this application, will be the use to the largest extent that it will have, given the current zoning. So you can't expand the use. You wouldn't be able to change it by putting it into larger structures because it's not a permitted use anymore.
So that would have to be part of a brand new development permit application at some future point?
So if I'm only referring to storage of personal goods. That use cannot be expanded without a rezoning of the site. It would have to be rezoned first if you wanted to pursue that. Otherwise, another industrial use is the only option for redevelopment.
Okay, I just wanted proponents to be clear on that and council to be clear on that. Is there, come forward.
I'd like to speak on the two comments regarding the parking. Right now, we have a gate that we have to get outside, unlock the gate, swing it open. If the DP is approved, it's going to have a gate that comes up automatically, so there will never be any parking out in the cul-de-sac. I know the odd time when people park in front of the gate, they have to get out to open the gate, swing it open. But as far as parking on the roads, I know in that area there's other people that park from other companies in that cul-de-sac, but it's got nothing to do with the stop and store because the people open the gate, they drive in, there's tons of parking inside, so there's never an issue of parking out on the street. So, just commenting on those two comments that we heard.
I'll go back to council. Council, any questions that you have at this point after hearing from the public? Councilor Bird.
My question's about the parking. I understand the rationale in a reduction in so much as people are storing things that are generally in their vehicles, so they'll drive to the spot. Earlier you mentioned that a reduction in the parking is something that's been part of other storage developments. Can you speak to the percentage in the reduction? Is this, I'm looking to see if this is a similar reduction, the property is similar as far as maybe available street parking, or
Yes. So the last application that was in front of council was the big facility that's going up right now on Queensway. And that facility, again, requested a variance because it's mainly a function of our zoning bylaw not addressing the specific use. So it gets lumped in with other industrial uses. And that application did get a significant variance to their parking. I don't remember the exact percentage, but I do know that it was significant. I would say it's not unlike in terms of percentage than this one, if not more. And other facilities as well has gotten a variance. Again, I can't talk to the details of those.
Any other questions? Any more comments from the public? Mr. Wren.
Just with respect to parking, it is mentioned in the letter that we provided, and I just want to highlight that we actually, in our discussions with staff, used hard data. First of all, we had an Institute of Traffic Engineers study that shows storage needs far, far less parking than any other industrial or commercial use. But third, we provided 3 studies, one in the UK, 2 from the United States, that demonstrated over time that the traffic count going in and out of storage facilities was de minimis relative to same square footage if it was an office building, a shop, or etc. So we actually provided extensive data far beyond what we mentioned in our note.
Come forward, and your name and address, please.
Yes, my name is April Turner, and I reside at 1211 Village Greenway. I have a hard time in trying to understand why we're letting components putting the storage containers, making a storage facility of containers when I was up a month ago and let the council know I had phoned in approximately 3 years ago and we wanted to expand on our existing storage facility. And we just wanted to put a few extra containers on site. And I phoned into the planning department. I guess maybe that's where I went wrong, as I should have just put them on site. as a cowboy. But we were told no, so we didn't. And as I've talked to other storage facilities, they too have said the same thing. They bought them, put them on site, not realizing they weren't a part of the agenda for the district's planning department, and they were told to take them off site, which they did. Now we've got a new facility that's just gone up, and it's multi-million dollars that he has put into it, a state-of-the-art. I mean, we've been here for 20 years with 3 facilities, 2 of them that are metal clad, one that is above ground storage that has boats and RVs and such as. We don't allow people to put their metal containers on there, being that I was told that the district didn't want to see a lot of that on site. So the district right now, or the proponents right now have a license that would license them to keep boats, RVs, vehicles on site with the license that they have, and they could make a really good living at that. One of our sites is that, and it's in high demand. Do we need another facility with just storage containers? Yes, down the road it can be used as something else, but we have to look and watch that fall apart over, as he says, 9 years or 15 years or whatever. But don't forget, it's not really temporary. When you're going to let somebody put that in place, who knows when they pluck 2 or 3 out and add those new ones in, 30 years later, it's still a metal storage facility. So the new proponent that's in town, Squamish Storage, he's opening up this massive over 100,000 square feet of storage, I'm sure it is, plus. Is it needed? Do we need extra storage right now this minute? No, in a couple of months there's going to be unbelievable amount of storage. And he's really raised that bar for Squamish, which we're there now. I was born and raised in Squamish. So this used to be a small little town when that industrial park opened, which is now a business park. I think the land was almost given to just get people to build there without paying taxes, without even buying the land. Now, look what it's become. It's beautiful, it's wonderful. Just because it's around the corner or a little out of sight or everybody's not driving by it every day doesn't really mean that we should allow something at this level to go in. Anyway, thank you.
Thank you. Any other comments from the public? Seeing none. So, council, I'm going to put the motion on the floor, but I'm going to give you some guidance here on what our options are tonight. So I can put the motion on the floor because I brought it back for reconsideration. It doesn't need to be seconded. It's just going to be on the floor. We can consider the motion as it is. If it fails, it cannot be brought back for 6 months. If you want to put forward an amendment, you put forward an amendment to the motion on the floor. And then we vote on the amendment. But remember what Mr. Velasquez said about the variances. If you're amending one of the variances that is linked to the DP, then we should really think about referring it back to staff because it would change the layout of the DP. And if you would like to put forward a brand new motion, you would put forward a motion to rescind the original motion that I will put back on the floor. That would need to be seconded, and then you could put a new motion forward. Finally, you could put we could put forward a motion to rescind and refer this back to staff if there's particular issues that council would like addressed, rather than defeating the DP. Is that clear? Councilor Pettigill?
On the initial option, if we vote it down and then it could come back in 6 months or more, my understanding is that if it did come back, anything that came back would have to be under the current bylaws as opposed to the old one.
That's correct. And also just a reminder, as staff said earlier, we cannot put an amendment or a condition on this DP without the consent of the proponent. So that is also an instance where you would consider sending it back to staff for discussion. Although we heard tonight Mr. Reynolds provide some guidance on where they're willing to go in that respect, on the issue of timing. So, the motion is now on the floor for discussion. Councilor French.
I'm speaking in favor of the motion. A significant amount of time and energy has been put into this, not just by staff, but a number of other individuals and groups. This has become a complex issue out of what I think should be a fairly simple issue. I've reviewed all the material. I've listened carefully to what everybody has said, and I'm relying on the expertise of the staff here. I think they've done an excellent job of putting this report together, and I defer to the experts who have put this before us. I'm supporting it.
Councilor French. Councilor Anderson.
Thank you. I will be voting again in favor of approving the variances as per the present motion. Due to general concern about the fate of lands for industrial uses in Business Park, I've been supportive of the 2017 initiative to restrict storage uses. The short-term use to flexible transitional use is of interest to me, and I accept the proponent's account of that consideration. I also accept the planning department's consideration of discouraging long-term storage use. The issue of expansion to other sites of this format of containers has been raised by one of the other speakers previously, and I agree. I would be very concerned about that prospect. The application reviewed according to the previous allowable use of storage as per planning department's account. Also on the floodplain bylaw, consideration of that, taking into consideration of how it's administered. This I take into account. The parking was of an issue for me, and the reason why I visited the site. I am familiar with another site next to a truck route with parking issues. It's also kind of a low-cost storage, but at this one, I'm convinced that the parking will not be or should not need to be a challenge. I also must be mindful of the length of time involved in this application already, and therefore I would be disappointed for the applicant or any business person going through a process like this to have to return again under the circumstances. I'll be voting in favor.
Any other councillors wish to comment at this point? Councillor Race.
Thank you. Well, I guess it's almost 4 weeks ago now, I voted against this application. And now as then, I want to first say that I'm not concerned by the omission of a business license or that, and I don't see anything particularly wrong with the conduct of the proponents coming forward, and it doesn't form part of my decision at all. The other thing is I generally don't, and I agree with the proponent with respect to the issue of competitiveness and so forth, and I generally don't make land use decisions based on who else is in the same business. To me, that's not part of the land use decision. So I'm not considering whether or not there is sufficient competition, too much competition, not enough competition. That for me doesn't form part of my decision. I 4 weeks ago was concerned about the parking, and the parking variance. And I still have a little bit of concern about that because it's on a cul-de-sac and some of these other units are on a straight street, which is more conducive to parking on the street for overflow parking and so forth. But thank you, staff and Councillor Herford, I think, that pointed it out that we've previously given variances for storage units for parking. And I think as a matter of fairness, we would have to extend the same thing to this. So I am not opposed to that particular variance. I remain opposed to this application, however, because of the form and character. fundamental to me is the look of this, and compared to the other units that are in the business park, and even evaluated under the previous OCP, form and character just does not, in my mind, meet the mark it should meet. We're talking about something very basic here. As I asked the question of staff, one of the guidelines is to avoid monotony in building form and character. Painting the ends yellow doesn't do it for me, I'm sorry. This is essentially a very monotonous looking project. That is not what we have asked previous applicants for under the old OCP as well as this OCP. And so I cannot support excuse me, this application.
I'm going to put forward an amendment, which is to add a condition to this DP that it is limited to 9 years from date of issuance of the business permit, building permit, sorry. And if that's seconded, I'll speak to it. Seconded by Councillor Stoner. So I was part of previous council and voted to not allow for the expansion of storage in the business park further than what we had there. And I believe, though, that proponents should be able to use their land until they're ready to develop. I see this as a temporary use, but I want to put a limit on that to encourage the development of land over time. I don't disagree with Councillor Race that the form and character is ideal, even under the old OCP, but it is tucked away. It's not highly visible, and I think there is a demand for this type of storage in the short term. So those are the reasons I've put forward this amendment. And by way of process, council, we would vote on the amendment. If it is approved, then we would vote on the main motion as amended. If it's disapproved, we go back to the original motion on the floor. Councilor.
I can live with your amendment.
On the amendment, any other councillors wish to speak to it? Councillor Stoner.
Yeah, I am in favor of the motion on the floor with the amendment. I appreciate the clarifications that have been made with regards to when the application was made relative to the changes in the zoning bylaw and the existing business licenses on site. With those additional pieces of information, I do feel like those have addressed some of the concerns I had originally. And with the variances specifically, I don't have any particular concerns with the variances as they have been brought forward. But in clarification that was brought forward by the proponent, that this is a transitional use, I appreciate the amendment that's been made that solidifies that.
Any other comments on the amendment before I call the question? Councilor Race?
Yeah, I will not be supporting this motion. Appreciate the thought behind it, but for me, 9 years is far too long. If this is truly transitional, I would be somewhere around 3 years. I'm not at 9 years, so I will not be supporting this.
Councilor Herford.
About the amendment and the time frame, what mechanisms do we have at that time, and how does that work? That process, to get some clarification on how that would work.
For you, Mayor. So the way the amendment would work is that we would register a Section 219 restrictive covenant on the property, in which the landowner and the applicant would voluntarily agree to discontinue the use, the non-conforming use, 9 years from the date of the building permit. And then we would have to put that in our system and monitor the time frame.
would that be triggered at renewal of business license?
Exactly, it would go as a record in the business license as well as in our land database.
You share Councilor Race's concern over form and character. I have some issues with the parking. This particular cul-de-sac is really tight, and there's very little room for one vehicle probably in the on-street parking. So I think it is slightly different from the other locations, but I'd like to see a shorter use for the. But I know that affects the business case. I'm not too sure where you go there. I see somewhere around 5 new temporary use. I don't think I'd be supporting that. People would like to see. I appreciate the spirit, but it's
Okay. Seeing no other comments, I'll call the question on the amendment. All those in favor? Opposed? Councilor Race, Councilor Herford. Opposed? Councilor Pengam. Opposed. Motion carries. So on the main motion as amended. So that would be including all these variances and a section 219 covenant that would restrict the temporary use to 9 years. I don't see any comments, so I will. Councilor Pengam.
Just a question of clarification. I think we're trying to find a way to fairly apply the rules of the day. Can you speak to Councilor Race's comment in regards to form and character, and if we are in the practice of varying form and character at the time of this bylaw for other projects?
Yes, so form and character, there are guidelines, if you look at the projects in the same development permit area, they all look differently. Generally speaking, and I think I mentioned this earlier in the presentation, projects that are not on kind of main fairways, especially in industrial areas, we do apply a lesser standard, and you do want to have a lesser standard so that the cost of space, when that space gets leased out in terms of industrial space, is not affected by a high building standard in those areas that are not so visible. So this would be one of those instances. The applicant did make some effort in providing the yellow paint on those units that are visible from the street to provide some architectural interest. But yes, that guideline is questionable.
Any other comments before I call the question? So on the motion as amended, with the variances, and Councilor Herford.
Sorry.
That's all right.
Comment. Even the amended motion, I will be supporting the parking is a concern. I understand the logic of it. Over the 9 years, I look back and how busy our business park was 9 years ago, and I think we all agree that the rate of change is faster than the last 9 years. I see that going forward. So as much as it may not be considered an issue of today, I see the next 2-3 years as the properties adjacent to it in the general area grow, this could be a source of conflict and focus.
Can I ask a question? If this motion is defeated, the applicant has the ability to bring back a different application in 6 months, but it would have to be for an industrial use.
Well, it could be a different application now. It's only if you bring back the same application as the 6-month period applies.
But it couldn't be storage.
It could not be storage.
Any other comments? Councilor Beck.
I voted against last time, and I really struggled with this one. It's been really hard to wrap my head around rules at the time versus where we are now and where we want to be, and making sure I'm making the decision in the right context, in a fair way. I think, what I've seen in the letters is, it's challenging for the public as well as, myself, for sure, to understand and make sure we're restricting our decision to the appropriate rules at the appropriate time. But hearing all the discussion and looking at what's really legally at issue today, it's maybe not the decision I would make in the context of today's bylaws, but in those rules at the time, I think I need to support this.
I'll call the question. All those in favor of the motion as amended? Opposed? Councillor Herford, Councillor Race opposed. Motion carries. Thank you, staff. Thank you, everyone, for coming tonight. So, moving on. Bylaws. We have first 3 readings of the District of Squamish Solid Waste Utility and Regulation Bylaw number 2547, 2017, Amendment Bylaw 265, 2018. Over to staff. Who's taking us off?
Good evening, Mayor and Council. My name is Shannon White, and I am one of the Sustainability Coordinators at the District of Squamish. Right. I'm here in front of you today to discuss, to present a revision to the Solid Waste and Utility Bylaw. So the revision that we are here to present is purely in relationship to what is defined as the mixed waste category of garbage entering the landfill. So the mixed waste by our bylaw is mixed waste is residual waste containing more than 20% recyclable material and or organic material by weight or volume. So that 20%, and the reason why it's an X is that it is a threshold, is as we're presenting it in the slide. So I just wanted to provide a bit of an image to what type of loads at the landfill we are discussing here. So this is really, all these 4 images here are loads that would be considered mixed waste. So they contain over 5% at the time these photos were taken of recyclable materials. You can see dirty wood, clean wood, and various recyclable material. We currently use the mixed waste rate as a financial incentive to divert recyclable and organic material from the landfill. So essentially, it's anyone who is bringing over the percentage threshold of recyclable material into landfill is charged a higher rate. It is currently over double the rate of general garbage. A little bit of background is that originally when this rate was put into the bylaw, it was implemented at a 5% threshold. During the public engagement that took place due to the solid waste bylaw revisions in 2017, in talking to especially commercial enterprises, they indicated that the challenges and the obstacles that they would have to overcome to conform to the solid waste bylaw revisions were quite tough, as well as meeting the mixed waste threshold of 5%. So at the time, it was decided to increase the threshold to 20% in 2017, but also include a clause that reduced that percentage by 5% every year until we came back to 5%. And really, the intent of us today is to reduce the rate by that 5% and then also to harmonize pieces within the bylaw so that there's a schedule put into the bylaw so that we don't need to come forward to council next year and the following year, that it would just continue. That being said, there's a recommendation that council gives first 3 readings to the District of Squamish Solid Waste Utility and Regulation Bylaw number 2547, 2017, Amendment Bylaw 2650, 2018.
Any questions, Council? Someone like to move the motion. Moved by Councilor Stoner, seconded by Councilor Pettition. Any comments? Seeing none, call the question. All those in favor? Opposed? Motion carries. Thank you. Okay, next up, under section 9A, administration, we have a BC housing support for the District of Squamish. So there's a staff recommendation that the mayor send a letter to Minister Robinson, Minister of Municipal Affairs and Housing, as a thank you for the funding project, or the funding provided for the Buckley Avenue Affordable Rental Housing Project as part of the Community Housing Fund Program. And some of the other important projects that we've had approved or are coming forward with the help of BC Housing, including Centrepoint, Under One Roof, and Future Seniors Housing. So I think it's important to acknowledge the province and I'd like to send that letter. Moved by Councilor Ray, seconded by Councilor French. All those in favor? Opposed? Motion carries. Thank you. So next we move on to development permit number 479-39359 Queens Way.
Good evening, Mayor and Council. My name is Carrie Hamilton. I'm a planner, District of Squamish, and I'm presenting to you today. Oh, we don't have a presentation up. Let's see. Press cancel on this. There we go. And I'll be presenting to you today development permit 479, located at 39359 Queensway. So 39359 Queensway was created as part of a larger subdivision in 2007. For this area of land between Queensway and the BC Rail Line, from Pioneer Way to the South Commercial Way. Since the subdivision, the land has been used primarily for equipment storage, and this is the first development permit application received for this property. The property is located within the Squamish Business Park sub-area plan, which has since been consolidated into the new OCP. It therefore falls under DPA 6, Squamish Industrial Park, and DPA 6A Business Park sub-area plan development permit guidelines. The property is zoned light industrial I1 and is surrounded by adjacent properties to the north, west, and south that are also zoned light industrial. Properties to the east across Queensway are zoned specialized industrial business, which is I8, and the property is a few lots south of the mixed-use MUD 1 zone. The property is adjacent to two mostly vacant lots to the north and south. So the official community plan sets out development permit areas to establish guidelines that include the form and character of industrial developments. As this application was received before the new official community plan was adopted, it is subject to the 2010 OCP and DPA guidelines. Consideration of whether to approve or deny a development permit is non-discretionary, meaning that as long as the proposed development meets all of the DPA guidelines, a permit can only be approved. So the DPA application seeks to allow for construction of two-story light industrial buildings. The two buildings are proposing to offer up to 7 separate light industrial units with an option for a mezzanine in each unit. The proposed uses range from warehousing and servicing for the property owners, with the front building proposing manufacturing uses and a possible fitness facility. The building was strategically placed at the front of the site to enhance the streetscape and stay in uniformity with the existing buildings to the south. Concrete unit pavers delineate pedestrian movement around the site, and they are distinct from the asphalt paving. Parking requirements for all proposed uses have been met on site, with 16 parking stalls and 1 accessibility stall, and 1 loading bay stall is provided as required in the zoning bylaw. The siding is a mix of both dark gray and off-white precast concrete panels, accented by rusted brown finish vertical panels. Metal canopies with the same finish wood soffit and steel angled brackets wrap around all of the building frontages, as well as the pedestrian pathway along the north side of the front building. So employee amenities to the site include rear patio space and a Class A enclosed bicycle parking. The accessory garbage facility is compliant with the district's wildlife attractant bylaw, or wildlife resistant bylaw. And then the frontage landscaping prioritizes pedestrian access to the site with both a ramp and a staircase. Frontage landscaping also provides bicycle parking and seating. DP 479 was presented to the District of Squamish Advisory Design Panel, ADP, on August 16th, 2018. The committee was supportive of the project with a few important revisions left to be resolved with staff. These revisions include increasing ground floor unit and window height to support industrial uses, reducing the amount of gray along the facade, canopy detail to support a more industrial look, canopies at the rear door and employee patio areas, and adding surface treatment differentiation and curb stops. All of these recommendations were addressed. And the ADP minutes can be found in attachment to your report this evening. And the images on this slide show the evolution of the building's facade from the original application date to the final product in front of council this evening. So in sum, the project was posted to the district's development showcase and a development application sign was posted on the site. No comments have been received to date. So staff's recommendation is for council to approve the following recommendation: that the District of Squamish authorize development permit number 479 located at 39359 3rd Avenue, subject to landscape bonding, removal of an existing flood covenant and registration of a new one, and the execution of an encroachment agreement. And the alternative recommendation is for council to refuse the development permit number 479 for the property legally described 39359 Queensway. And just to note that council would need to state as part of their decision which of the guidelines the council has determined are not met by the application if they choose to go for that motion.
Thank you. Did you notice something there, councillors?
Yeah, if you go back 2 slides, that one is the wrong address.
Oh, my apologies.
39359 Queensway.
Queensway, it should be Queensway.
It's right on the agenda.
Yes.
Any questions, council, about this DP? Councillor Anderson.
Yes, I wonder if I might be able to refer to Schedule B of the document we have in front of us. I have a particular question about the trucking access.
Go ahead.
The diagram on Schedule B has the shape of a truck, if you like, entering the facility. And my question is whether this layout will allow for a 5-ton truck, because I can't tell whether anywhere in the documentation or in the advisory design kind of discussion whether 3-ton or 5-ton will be able to access this site. It's not an insignificant question. As a former 5-ton truck driver that encountered many difficulties in making deliveries and shipments, the issue of industrial use functionality has come up in discussions relating to this project.
Can I let staff answer your question before you talk about it? Thank you.
Through you, Mayor, that question has come up at ADP, and the applicant has provided more information around the types of truck turning radiuses. I, at this point, cannot confirm it between the 3 and the 5, but I can confirm that the trucks that the intended users for the site, the truck capacity is would accommodate those uses for the potential users.
That is,
you have to follow up?
A 5-ton truck being 35 feet in length. There's been discussion about whether that would be accommodated at a similar project nearby. That's the reason for my question.
Mr. Valenzuela?
I just want to also clarify that it doesn't, although it's a valid concern, it doesn't appear in our guidelines or in any of our requirements for a certain length of trucks to be able to maneuver through the site. So if there was a variance request in here, it would be a little different.
Other questions? Councilor Milford?
Not truck related, but similar. These, can you speak to the requirements for loading a loading dock? So where the loading space appears specific to building 2, but building 1 that's listed as warehouse industrial doesn't have a similar accommodation. Is that not something that we require in this?
So through you, Mayor, the zoning bylaw requires, dependent on the amount of square footage of industrial use, how many loading bay spaces are required on the site. The zoning bylaw requires for the amount of square footage that is on here, that there's only one loading bay. So regardless of where the location is, there's nothing to dictate the location of it, just that there is a certain amount on the site.
So it's total square footage, not that it's two.
Correct.
It would be up to the person leasing that space and to make sure that their needs are met. But technically, this conforms to our guidelines. Any other questions? What's your pleasure, Council? Council Race?
I'll move the recommendation of the Queensway address.
Thank you. Seconded by Councilor Friend. Any comments, Councilor Race?
Well, it's quite an attractive building. I was quite impressed with it, actually, and I didn't notice the truck part, but I was quite impressed with the appearance of this building and the effort to follow the recommendations of the ADP. I'm happy to support this.
Yeah, I'll just second what Councilor Race just said in terms of I appreciate the proponent's efforts to really improve the frontage of the building and the aesthetic from the curbside. So I'll be supportive of this project.
Councilor French?
And I'm encouraged that an actual building is going up on one of these properties. They've all sat bare for quite a while, and I think this building hopefully will start a trend in that section. We'll actually see this part of Queensway develop.
I'll call the question. All those in favor? Opposed? Motion carries unanimously. Thank you. Okay, next up, EP 493, Waterfront Landing, Phase 2.
So I'd like to introduce Susan Stratus. I know there's some new faces around the council table, and Susan Stratus is a consultant that works for the district on some applications, and she's working, one of them is the waterfront landing application. And she will present the development permit proposal.
Thank you, Jonas. Good evening, Mayor and Council. I realize it's a fairly big agenda tonight, but Jonas had asked that I provide a bit of background on Waterfront Landing as a whole. So bear with me if you don't mind. We're going to just walk through a few slides to bring Council up to date on what has happened in the overall Waterfront Landing. So the property is located across the Mount Blind Channel from downtown. It's 21.5 hectares total. The parcel we're looking at tonight for the development permit is 2.37 hectares in size, so it's a part of it. Now the site, I'll go on to the next slide, which actually shows it better. The property is a previous industrial site. I think probably most people are familiar with it, and it is going through quite a bit of cleanup. Let me just get my arrow working here.
Almost had it there.
It's no matter how many times I hear it, I never get that right. So the Mount Blind Channel is the east boundary, and this line down the middle shows the surveyed navigable channel. And the Highway 99 is here. CN Rail forms the the east boundary of the site, and the Mount Blind Channel is the west. The site conditions are changing, I think, as we speak. There is construction going on, but this is a view of from the downtown showing the undeveloped portion of the site. Alders growing up along the shoreline. The policy framework here is the OCP designation is downtown, and the sub-area plan was put in place and designates the site that we're looking at tonight as mixed density residential. There are 3 development permit areas on the site: DPA 1 Environment, DPA 2 Flood, and DPA 13 Form and Character. And it's the form and character we're going to be looking at tonight. The zoning is CD40, which is a special zone that was put in place for the waterfront landing area. And yes, it is in the designated flood hazard. So there has been quite a bit of work done to get to this point, starting in mid-2016 through to September 2017. The sub-area plan and new DP guidelines were developed. A new zoning bylaw was adopted for the site, and a land development agreement was put in place, which I'll speak to a bit further on. Those 3 documents form the basis of the policy that we look at for this site. A subdivision application is also underway to create the main parcels, and a Phase 1 DP was approved by Council a year ago, December 2017, and that was for 88 units that are now under construction. A site alteration permit for the site cleanup was issued by the district in February 2017, and the Phase 1 building permits are ongoing. A certificate of compliance was issued by the province in May of 2018, which certifies that the site cleanup, the contaminated waste and so on around the site have been removed, and that is for the portion of the site that we're, basically half the site that we're looking at. So that was also a fairly important step. A number of technical reports formed the basis of the sub-area plan and the previous applications. There was a traffic impact assessment done, an environmental and bioinventory assessment, water and sewer system analysis, a geotechnical report, flood hazard assessment. A noise and vibration assessment was done because of the proximity to CN Rail and BC Rail. A marine survey was done to confirm the property boundaries on the shoreline, and a commercial demand analysis was done to determine what extent of commercial use would be viable on this property. Those technical reports all folded into the sub-area plan and the land development agreement. So just looking at the sub-area plan land uses very quickly. The magic touch. Thank you. The site along the Mamcombe Blind Channel, there are 2 waterfront parks shown in green. I think a number of council members may have attended the open house recently for the waterfront park at the north end, and a second waterfront park will ultimately be developed at the south end. The red areas are mixed commercial, residential, one area along Laurelwood Road, and the second one that we refer to as the Village, which is a mix of public uses, commercial, and multifamily. The yellow areas are what is called mixed density residential, which is a mix of townhouse forms, duplex, but does also permit small apartments. And the orange blocks are areas where apartments are designated. The intent of the development plan is to have lower scale buildings in the village area, and ultimately to have higher buildings up against the bluff, which may go up to 6 stories. On the water edge, the purple area is designated for marine use, and a marina is planned, as well as a storage facility for kayaking and small boats. The other important feature is the proposed pedestrian bridge, which I'll speak to in a few minutes. The sub-area plan included a parks and trail scheme that identified all of the pedestrian routes, both on the roads and internally on a trail system. And these commitments are both in the sub-area plan and in the land development agreement, which spells out when these various trails and parks will be developed. The phasing plan from the sub-area plan is what is being followed, and the first 88 units were approved in Phase 1, outlined in red, and the one we're looking at tonight is 134 units in Phase 2. So the new DPA guidelines that are contained in the sub-area plan deal with general design and site planning, residential guidelines, specific guidelines for the Marine Village area, and some additional guidelines for the Mamcomb Channel, which overlap to some extent with the new OCP DP environment guidelines. So both of those will be referenced when we get to the waterfront park. The zoning for the site, most of the site is zone CD40, shown in white. The gray areas were rezoned to P3 to indicate their status as public parks, and the purple area is where the proposed marine areas will go in the middle part of the site. The CD40 zone reflects the sub-area plan, which I just walked through, so I won't repeat that, but the CD40 zone is written as bylaw regulations with heights, maximum density, setbacks, the typical regulations. And the land development agreement is a Section 219 covenant that was registered as a condition of the rezoning. And it establishes the timing and the provision of security for all of the major commitments that the developer made at the time, which includes affordable rental housing, market rental housing, daycare, the waterfront park and trail network, the pedestrian bridge, construction of major infrastructure of Laurelwood Road and the rail overpass, public access to strata parks and trails, shoreline restoration, and construction of the public marina and boat storage. There are other commitments in there, but these are the main ones that we keep in mind as we're going through the approvals. So for Phase 2, there are two really important commitments in the land development agreement. The first is the waterfront park, which needs to be designed as part of the Phase 2 work. The portion adjacent to the Phase 2A development needs to be completed prior to Unit 200 occupancy permit. So it will unfold concurrently with construction of Phase 2, but it won't be completed until Phase 2 is virtually complete. The pedestrian bridge, the design of that bridge is a Phase 2 requirement, and it is currently undergoing initial design, including agency approvals, and there are quite a number of agency approvals. Top amongst them are Transport Canada, who requires that any bridge still allow access for any marine users who are further up the channel. So it's going to be an opening bridge, I've forgotten the technical term for that, a drawbridge, thank you, so that the marina users up the channel can continue to use it. There will be public consultation early in the new year on that bridge. I believe the proponents are meeting individually with the different marine groups that are, the marinas that are up the channel. And then there will be general public consultation for people to comment on the bridge structure. So that bridge is required to be constructed and completed prior to the final occupancy permit in Phase 2 that we're considering tonight. So moving on to the subject of the development permit, what is in front of you on this map is the site plan for Phase 2, the site plan and landscape plan. This phase is 134 units, and it is all townhouses broken into groups of 4 to 10 unit blocks. There is a variety of unit types, and I'll just point out a couple of things if I can get this working again. Okay. This site plan is based on 2 internal roads. There is Road B running north-south, and Road A, which is the primary entrance to the Marine Village, which is up here to the west. The site plan is turned sideways, unfortunately, so north is to your right-hand side. This development has 2 points of entrance, one here and one here, so there is opportunity to loop through the site. These are strata roads internally, and the applicants have provided an emergency services plan. These roads meet fire department requirements and turning radiuses. And the important part, I think, of this site plan is this large central park that runs through the middle. And that park meets up with a similar linear park that was provided in phase 2. And phase 1, pardon me. And there are 2 smaller park entrances that fit with the waterfront park that is to the north. So all of this area to the north here is the waterfront park, which doesn't show particularly well on that side. There are a mix of 3-bedroom and 2-bedroom units, roughly split, and there are also 9 units that have a flex suite on the lower floor. So there are 5 different unit types altogether, and these are contained within 18 separate buildings. The design rationale, just to put this in context, that was developed in the early days of the site planning. Well, I can't get that, thank you. This is Laurelwood Road running along the east edge of the site. So when you come into the site and get onto the main entrance road, which we consider Road A, on the right-hand side is a broad neighborhood considered to be the Woods, which has some consistent design elements to it. Phase 1 and Phase 2 have a number of images that will look similar. On this side of Road A is a neighborhood called the Bluffs, which is intended to come forward. It's up against the very steep slopes that you will see on the, if you go and look at the site. And these will have another design image that's probably quite different than what we see in the Woods neighborhood. The third neighborhood is the landing, which will be apartments and commercial use along the waterfront. Again, have a different flavor than the other neighborhoods. And the fourth general area, is the waterfront park. The colors and materials, there are 4 color groups that are established, and the materials are intended to reflect contemporary industrial materials with wood accents. There is corrugated metal roofing, and I should have changed that. It's fiber cement panel siding, both smooth and lap siding, cedar fencing, perforated metal and timber gates, metal canopies with painted wood soffits. So that's the material group that's being used. And just to look at these on the buildings themselves, 2 of the colors are shown on this, and a couple of the design elements are the steep pitched roofs. These gables are repeated through all of the buildings and also on the ends of these buildings. And there are projections on the ends, which is one of the design guideline requirements, that the ends of the buildings have a lot of detail on them. And moving on to 2 of the other buildings with the red, showing this in the streetscape, there's a lot of articulation along the fronts of the buildings and again on the edges. The 9 lock-off suites that are provided provide also a lot of adaptability features. The trails and walkways themselves in the site are hard surfaced and lit. The playgrounds provide resilient surfacing, and the lock-off units provide an unobstructed path of travel to the street, pocket doors, bathrooms that are set up for future wheelchair accessibility, electrical outlets and switches, which are kind of a basic palette of accessibility features in these units. So just looking at the integration with Phase 1, on the right-hand side, the Phase 1 featured these very deep gabled overhangs that wrapped around the buildings. And Phase 2 is intentionally lightened up some of these features, and it's meant to be a more simple, contemporary look that still fits with Phase 1. A lot of the mullioned windows and the prominent gables are repeated, but not with the same kind of very deep gable features that we had in Phase 1. So the neighborhood open space, which I mentioned, provides a very generous tree canopy and landscaping. I think the landscape bond is $1.4 million for this project. There's the central flex space area that also features playground facilities here, and I think this climbing structure is one of the specific things, and a custom-made cedar seating area that wraps around so kids can, parents can watch their kids and be kind of protected from the street. There are a couple of other informal play areas that I haven't shown here, but they feature mounds so that, again, for very casual play, and stepping stones, local granite, and a series of benches are put throughout this park, the central park, and some of the other small park spaces. The buildings themselves provide private yards for each unit. Every unit has a front door with a small play garden space in front, and they also have full deck spaces across the back. The corner units are covered. So these are fairly generous decks along the back. The parking, this image showing the Strata Road parking, all of the parking driveways meet the bylaw standards, 6 meters length minimum, which is the standard to allow full vehicle parking in the driveway without overhanging into the roadway. The custom fences and railings are also another part of the feature. And the wood doors and wood soffits extending down are part of the design guideline requirements to bring natural wood materials in to break up the use of the hardy plank siding. The internal trails and walkways are continued in the same pattern as they were for Phase 1, with all of the units face either onto a public sidewalk or onto these internal trails. So there's a real separation between vehicles and pedestrian use. This lower drawing shows the units that face onto the waterfront park, which has a wide pedestrian walkway separating the park and the units, so the units themselves don't spill out, overtaking the public park. So this map just shows basically the pedestrian routes through this site, highlighting the fact that you can move through the site and then move to the commercial village without mixing in with the vehicle traffic. The project went to the advisory design panel in September, and the design panel had quite a wide range of comments, as is often the case, but they did support the project in general and made a number of recommendations to work with staff on some specific issues. And I won't read through these, but the applicants did go back to the drawing board and revise a number of things, including the site plan and the park areas, which made quite a bit of difference. I won't read this either, but the project does not contain any variances. It meets all of the zoning bylaw requirements for site coverage, height, setbacks, bicycle parking. It meets all of the usable open space requirements, both private and common open space. And parking, it meets all of the parking requirements with provision of 2 car share vehicles. So as was done previously, I think you've possibly seen the 2 moto cars that were provided initially by the Waterfront Landing project. So 2 more moto vehicles will be provided. The zoning bylaw for Waterfront Landing allows 1 car share vehicle in lieu of 5 parking spaces. And in this site, that would be a maximum of 2 car share vehicles. So with the car share vehicles, the district is still, I think the procedure for doing that is still evolving internally, but I think the idea is that the district doesn't want to get involved in managing that in any way. So there will be an agreement required between the applicants and Modo, who have an interest in expanding in Squamish, and the cars will be provided directly to Modo by the applicants, but secured through an agreement that the district approves. So the staff review, the project meets all zoning bylaw requirements. It also meets the land development agreement conditions, the parks, the building forms required, and just related to the waterfront park, which is a land development agreement requirement. We plan to bring that forward separately to council in early 2019. The park has quite a lot of different issues compared to the housing part of this development permit. So we'll bring forward a separate development permit that deals with the park facilities that are proposed and the shoreline treatment that is the main part of the environmental DP conditions. So early January, not early January, but sometime early in 2019 that will be brought forward. The staff review also concluded that the project meets the development permit guidelines, and as was referenced earlier, if a project meets the development permit guidelines, I forget how that's worded, could you speak to that?
Well, there's little discretion on behalf of council other than the determination that the project meets guidelines. Otherwise, there's no variances involved.
So the DP 493 that is attached to the agenda, there are a number of conditions that the 134 units be built as per the attached plans, the adaptable design features be included, hard and soft landscaping, and the as per the plans. Play equipment, we will take another look at the details of those with staff at a staff level. The 1.47 million security deposit is required for landscaping, and prior to building permit issuance, the car share vehicle agreement needs to be in place. Habitat compensation plan needs to be finalized, and speaking to that, that's an outstanding provincial requirement that relates to the original site cleanup. There was a man-made ditch that was considered to be habitat by the province under the riparian area regulations. So it was a provincial requirement. That ditch was filled in, and it's a provincial requirement that compensation be provided. The province has agreed to the compensation plan proposed by the proponent's environmental consultant, but we want to fold that into the environmental DP for the park. So we'll be bringing forward the details on that with the waterfront park DP, but it is listed as a condition of this DP that prior to any building permits being issued, that be finalized. So we'll bring forward the details of that in early 2019. And finally, the other DP conditions are that prior to occupancy permit, again, we've repeated the land development agreement requirements, that the portion of waterfront park adjacent to this phase be constructed by Unit 200, the pedestrian bridge be constructed by the fine occupancy permit for the final Phase 2 unit, school bus service be provided prior to the first occupancy permit on the site. That is something that was established early in the land development agreement, that until the pedestrian bridge is constructed, there's this interim period where the kids don't have a really direct way to get to school, and they tend to use the rail bridge and various shortcuts. So the applicants committed to working with the school district to providing a type of shuttle service. So that hasn't yet unfolded, but we have repeated it in this development permit just so that condition doesn't get lost. And finally, prior to occupancy permits, all of the statutory rights-of-way for the strata, trails, and parks need to be provided. Again, one of the conditions of the land development agreement was that the public have full access, not just to the public parks, but to the strata, parks, and trails, so that everyone can move through this site. So Sorry, that was a long presentation. The recommendations are that DP 493 be issued subject to the provision of the landscape security, and that the mayor and corporate officer be authorized to execute the development permit.
Thank you. Council, questions at this point? Councilor Anderson.
Yes, I'd like to ask regarding the habitat compensation provision. To your knowledge, do you know whether that habitat offsetting could take place off-site in another location?
Through the mayor, I'll see if I can just quickly go to a map. It is proposed, I'll just quickly find a map of the whole site if I can, which is probably right back at the beginning. There's one. The habitat compensation that's been approved by the province is to take place along this bluff. That's the primary location, and there's a secondary amount that is proposed to take place in the lagoon. And that has been approved by the province. The reason we're still looking at this is the district's practice has been for habitat compensation not to take place within parkland. So that's the only part that we're still discussing. And we definitely want it to be on site. That's always the preference, and I think OCP policy actually says that. So we'll bring this forward. We haven't actually finished the internal review on that, and we'll bring it forward in January. But just to answer your question, most of it is meant to take that place along the bluff.
There may then be opportunity in future to return to that issue in the next presentation.
Yes, when the park comes forward, we'll be talking about that in detail. Councilor Stoner.
You made reference to, I think it was 50 units affordable housing and 55 market. Are those, at what point are those to be built in Rockville and as part of the LDA?
Just go back to the phasing plan. The affordable housing is intended to be built in Phase 3B and the market rental housing in Phase 3C. The applicants have told us recently that they have a lot of townhouse units here which have gone well, I guess, but they are interested in bringing the apartment structures forward sooner. So we will know this for sure probably early in the new year, but as far as I have been told, they are actually planning to bring those affordable housing units sooner rather than Phase 3, so they may be the next phase. Rather than Phase 3A that is shown here as townhouse units, they may jump to Phase 3B. So they're coming relatively soon.
So two things. I see that there's a landscaping requirement, and just in terms of especially trees on strata roads, I've heard from other stratas that they initially start with trees, and then at some point in the future the strata decides it's too expensive to maintain the trees. Are these landscaping requirements just an upfront initial requirement, and then after that it's hands off, or do we sort of monitor that long term and make sure those things are maintained?
If I may, for you, Mayor. So it's a requirement of the development permit, and any changes to the landscaping, any major changes, and taking out trees on roads that say is a major change, would technically need an amendment to the development permit or a new development permit. I'm sure there's cases where it's, changes that have happened over time, and we haven't picked up on it. It's basically we operate on the basis of complaints. If there's a complaint, then we investigate. If there isn't, it goes on until there's a complaint.
And then in the site as a whole, in CD40, there's different colored polygons, and it seems it's expectation of different sorts of structures and buildings and purposes in those colors. Is that the land development agreement or the sub-area plan that's further specifying uses, and is that an initial requirement, and then after it's 10 years down the road they can change that, or are these things fixed in forever as well?
Sure. Through the mayor, the sub-area plan establishes policy for land use and describes, kind of in general terms, a range of housing types that are supported. The zoning bylaw is more specific. It lists the type of housing that is going to be there, but it's still kind of a bubble diagram. It doesn't lay out actual housing allocations, and it still allows for a range of things. You know, for instance, in any one of these parcels that are shown on the zoning map, you could do duplexes, townhouses, or apartments in any of those yellow areas. So the developers really could come forward with anything within that range. If they wanted to do something entirely different, and here's a for instance, the sub-area plan does not allow single-family homes in this area because it's considered part of downtown. If for any reason they decided they wanted to do single-family homes, they would have to do an amendment to the sub-area plan and to the zoning. So there's some scope for flexibility, but with limits.
If I just may add to that, in terms of commercial areas and commercial uses, they're also located in the zoning bylaw, and there's no flexibility on that in perpetuity until the zoning bylaw is changed. So, you know, if with commercial type of uses, you know, if there are a misuse issue, those usually come forward very quickly.
If I could add to that, it's a land development agreement requirement that they build a minimum, I forgot the exact number, I think it's 50,000 square feet of commercial. So that's a firm commitment that supersedes what the general requirements of the zoning bylaw are. But we have not laid out a fixed number of units per parcel, for instance, because we know the market conditions change. You know, it's a very big project, and over time, market conditions do change.
Where are the fourplexes located on the site? I couldn't find those in the files.
Oh, sorry, Gwen, let me just find the site plan here. There they are. The fourplexes are along the park edge. They are here. And that was done, it was one of the changes after the design panel was to break these buildings up a little bit more and provide more transparency through to the waterfront park. So the bigger units are generally located along this park frontage.
So that used to be all one building?
They were bigger, joined together blocks, yes.
And initially, when the application was submitted, I believe those were duplexes.
Yes.
There. They just kind of seemed out of place right next to the park.
Yes, the design we've got in front of us is actually kind of the third iteration. We went through quite a few kind of internal back and forths plus comments from the design panel. So this is the result of several sequential changes.
Thank you. Councilor Anderson?
I'd like to ask about the maximum walking distance to a transit stop. This was an issue in the original waterfront landing sub-area plan, and I haven't seen a circulation plan lately. So I wonder if you could address that. You referred to school bus service, but where are the nearest transit stops? It was over 600 meters at one time. Considered likely.
Through the mayor, when the sub-area plan was done, the project was referred to BC Transit.
Yes.
And as you know, there's nothing at this point. So BC Transit was quite excited about the opportunities here, both in terms of the pedestrian bridge, allowing people from, you know, the wider Valley Cliff neighborhood, as well as the people here, to kind of use a hub of bus services downtown. And Laurelwood Road has been designed with a bus stop here. So in terms of transportation, the longer term goal is the Clark Drive. There will be intersection improvements that are currently underway with the proponents, a new rail overpass that has bike and pedestrian facilities on it, leading to Laurelwood Road, which also is designed both with a bike lane and sidewalks, and a bus stop here. Ultimately, Laurelwood Road, and this was established in the traffic impact study that was done, Laurelwood Road is intended to continue over the Mamcombe Blind Channel with a vehicle bridge. So that is when the bus service will really come into play. Until that time, the BC Transit does expect to come down Laurelwood and use the bus stop here. They may go through the site just to loop around and turn around. And I guess one of the things I didn't mention was the major roads that are outlined here are public roads built to public road standards. These are not strata roads, these are public roads, and that allows buses to move through the site. BC Transit does not expect, however, that they will go down into the site as a stop-off. Laurelwood Road is really where they plan to serve people.
Any other questions about the DP? Seeing none. I'd also like to put a motion on the floor. Moved by Councillor French, seconded by Councillor Herford. Any comments, Councillor French?
We're getting to be a big town now. This is an exciting project, and I'm happy to see that it's where it's at.
Okay. Any other comments? Councillor Pino.
The thing I like about the particular site is that there's public park along the waterfront. I feel that's probably important to maintain public access along our whole waterfront, and I realize it's off the site. Part of my question about the other colored polygons is making sure that whatever goes there, whether or not it's parked, that somehow the public will have full access to the water always. But in terms of this particular site, I'm pleased to see that access is there.
Do you want to just?
Yeah, if I may clarify, there will be public access along the full length of that waterfront, even though it's not designated as park, but there'll still be a walkway.
There's walkways through the commercial area.
Councillor Herford?
I'm very impressed with the connectivity and the walkability of this. I think that the addition of this pedestrian bridge and eventually down the line the connectivity of the vehicle bridge over the blind channel and what that'll do to our transit system and just enhancing our downtown and integrating something that is right now very removed from the town. I think it's going to be a great addition.
Seeing no other comments, certainly I support this DP. I think it meets the guidelines. I think it provides visual interest, and I'm looking forward to the bridge part. Looking forward to those coming forward in the new year. So I'll call the question. All those in favor? Opposed? Motion carries unanimously. Thank you. Where are we at? So next up is the Squamish River Dike Upgrade, Everett Slough change order approval. Over to you, Mr. Wickham.
Good evening. My name is Chris Wickham. I'm the Director of Engineering. And coming forward today for approval of a change order to our contract with Whistler Excavation for the construction of the Upper Judge Slough Dike Upgrade. We have already awarded the contract for this important upgrade for flood hazard management in the Brockendale community. And frankly, we did better than we expected on the tendering. So the engineers had estimated the costs, looked at our budget, at our $3.9 million grant, and designed a dike that they felt would fit the budget and fit the provincial standards. As it turned out, the tenders came in more competitively than expected. We had budget left over, and they were able to revisit the erosion protection in one area of the dike, which has a high scour potential. There's a high velocity in that area. So it was felt that we'd get a lot of extra value out of upsizing the riprap in that area. So it's a self-launching riprap, so that when if the river scours underneath, the riprap falls down into that area and plugs the gap, if you will. And so this change order will allow us to put more and larger riprap in that area and increase the safety factor by that much more. It meets our budget. It meets the design intent for the dike. However, the change order is for $208,000, and staff are allowed to approve a change order of $200,000. And so I'm here to ask for your approval.
We
for
could
the
have
extra
moved them $8? Oh, yeah.
200,000, yeah.
Oh, yeah.
We could have left a few boulders out or something like that, but we felt it was important to respect the purchasing policy and come before you tonight.
Any questions, Councilor? Councilor Stoner?
Just to clarify, this doesn't bring the dike up to a different provincial standard. Right now, it's being built to a 1 in 200 year return. It doesn't change it to a 1 in 500 year, correct?
Correct. There is a future plan to bring it up to a 1 in 500 year, the so-called super dike, TM. But that's a future.
That's a future plan.
Yeah. This will. It won't change the return period of the dike. It won't change the height of the dike or size of flood, but it will reduce the probability of a dike failure.
Can I just clarify that the reason we didn't design it this conservatively from the get-go was because we didn't think we had enough budget?
Yes. It's one of the tricky bits. Tendering is very tightly controlled. Mm-hmm. So once we issue a tender, we have entered a legal agreement, essentially, with all the people who choose to respond to that tender. So if we issue a tender and then everything comes back more expensive than we can afford, we have to cancel that tender or come running in and try to get new budget and that sort of thing. And so we try to guess what the market can do. We come in for a scientific guess. We come in for budget with a Class D estimate. By the time we go for tender, we have a Class A estimate. We think we have it dialed, but then the market tells us what the actual price is. And so in this case, we got lucky. Sometimes we don't. Last year was actually pretty rough for tender prices. This was one of the better ones.
Just from my understanding, if we were to say, oh, let's take this opportunity and go to the 1 in 500 year standard, is that a $20,000 incremental cost? And just order of magnitude here, or are we talking like it's an extra $2 million and expropriation of land and all of that?
The latter. Going to the 1 in 500 year would be a $6 million, $7 million. And so the integrated flood hazard management plan has us do this upgrade, the eagle viewing upgrade, all of the upgrades to the coastal flood hazard downtown, and then cycle back and increase the Squamish River up to 1 in 500 years. So we'll be there in a decade, perhaps.
That's kind of why it's called the super dike, because it's super expensive. Councilor Herford.
Along the same sort of line of thought there. So this $208,000 increase still falls within the budget. We had really good tendering. How much, if we approve this, how much under, where are we at in relation to the budget with this addition?
If we approve this, we will have $1.3 million left in the budget for use for contingency and also for a next phase of the project, which would replace a culvert towards the north end with a larger beefed up culvert with a gate on it for improved fish access and flushing of the Jimmy Slough.
All right. Don't see any more questions. Moved by Councillor Ray, seconded by Councillor Stoner. All those in favor? Opposed? Motion carries. Thank you. Okay, next up, Affordable Housing Partnering Agreement.
Thank you, Mayor and Council. Tee this up. There we go. Okay, so tonight we're seeking to, Gary Buxton, General Manager here at the District, responsible for the housing portfolio. So we're looking for council approval to proceed with negotiations on partnering agreements directly with Sea to Sky Community Services Society and agreements regarding its assumption of the Buckley housing project shown in the image above. The festive recommendations in brief are to negotiate a partnering agreement for any units dedicated to the district by third parties. So those units that, in the previous example, that we would get from the waterfront project, those sorts of units. The second one is for staff to direct staff to prepare a lease with Sea to Sky for 60 years for the Buckley project, subject to getting final approval from BC Housing. The next one is to assign its interests in any existing or future promissory notes related to the Buckley Avenue project, and I'll cover that in some more detail. And then to negotiate an agreement with Sea to Sky Community Services regarding its assumption of the Buckley Affordable Rental Housing project. There are some issues we will need to address in that respect. The prior direction that we had from Council on this is that we pursue a partnering agreement or agreements with an operating entity for the Buckley project and any affordable housing units. So we're at a point of being able to deal with both those elements of that motion from November 20th. We had sort of preempted that by issuing a request for expression of interests for the Buckley project operations and maintenance. We issued that on October 18th, anticipating we would get to this point and to shorten the cycle. That closed on November the 23rd, and we only had the one submission, that being Sea to Sky Community Services. So we could issue an RFP, but I don't think that would be productive for anyone's purposes. So we're suggesting we proceed to negotiation on that partner agreement for third-party provided affordable units. We coincidentally, or very shortly thereafter, got notification from BC Housing about the Buckley project, and we did meet with them on December 4th. They're very supportive of the Sea to Sky selection. In fact, they were relieved, quite frankly, that that was our preferred operator. The assignment of promissory notes avoids some complex issues that were bubbling for us with respect to borrowing or public assent for the mortgage or the construction financing related to this project. So that is a useful and it simplifies issues for the district and for Ms. Matthews quite substantially. One issue that BC Housing did raise is that capital funding will not cover the youth hub. We always knew that for the tenant improvements inside the building. What they've said is that the cost of the structure associated with the youth hub needs to be split out. We're not sure what that means because you can't actually build the building without that space being created. So the youth hub, in our opinion, is not adding a great deal or anything to the project, but that is something we will need to resolve with BC Housing in the near future. We're going to suggest that it's a very small proportion of those overall project costs. So the intent's always been to partner on the Buckley project operation and management, so nothing really has changed there. It's always been our intent to proceed in that direction. In terms of the lease, 38648 Buckley, that would be between the district and Sea to Sky Community Services, and we would lease the property to them, much in the same way as we've done with the Under One Roof project. by necessity for funding the mortgage requirements, that's at least a 60-year commitment, so that everyone's got that certainty, particularly for the life of the building. In terms of the Buckley project, with the assignment, the partnering agreement is going to be between BC Housing and Cedar Sky Community Services. We won't be involved, the district will not be involved in this, but that arrangement will now be between BC Housing and Cedar Sky. That'll deal with the roles and the responsibility of the respective parties, but the rent structure that we put in our application to BC Housing is unchanged. It's going to be the same model that Council has seen previously. So there's a proportion that is moderate rent. There is rent geared to income and deep subsidy. I think it's 30, 50, 20. That is unchanged. The operational intent of that building is not changing. It's going to be exactly what we told you last time. It's just that agreement will be between Cedar Sky and BC Housing. In terms of the budget, was a little complex. We've got, I say, we had 110,000 in 2018. 2019, we're anticipating, subject to council approval, $75,000 to $80,000. We can use that to pay for any of the costs associated with the partnering agreement for the third-party units. Because that likely is not going to actually become operational until at least 2020 when we get our first units, there isn't a great deal of urgency in having budget ready for that at this point in time. And then it's 2020 through 2022 we can set that budget. But I think the financial plan has always anticipated that we're going to have to continue to fund operationally some form of housing function through our partner agreements. In terms of the Buckley project, the intention was that the district would manage that project through to commissioning. We would bring our partner on through the project so they were involved in the development of that project. It now turns out with the assumption of the project by Cedar Sky that that's going to happen much quicker, essentially right now. The district was going to provide the team to support that project development. Cedar Sky is now going to have to provide some of those resources, whether it's sort of the plans, monitoring and review, some form of project management, legal and financial. So there are going to be some costs to Cedar Sky to assume that work. There is in the financial plan 200,000 in 2019 that would be placed there deliberately with the understanding that we might have something like this come up with the Buckley project, either operationally or construction-wise, that we may need to cover. So that money is there. I doubt very seriously we're going to use anywhere near all of that in assisting Cedar Sky to assume the project. Well, there's no intent that Natasha and I step away from the project. The contract with Proficia Project Management is assignable. There's no plan to change that. That cost is baked into the project right now. We know what that cost is. So I'm fairly certain that money is going to be sufficient, but we will have to report back on that, on what that will be with council. In terms of implementation, we will commence lease negotiations. We're going to continue to work on the Buckley project and then slowly transfer that project to Cedar Sky, establish the costs, but we're going to continue to assist them. We are not abandoning this project and walking away from it. And then once we have Buckley back on the rail, so to speak, with Cedar Sky and everyone's clear, I can then talk to Cedar Sky about partnering agreements for the third-party units. So the non-festive recommendation, which I will not read, is as such. And if council has any questions.
I think we have a few questions. Councillor. Councilor Rice.
Oh, Council, wait, I thought you just said Council, sorry. So I went through, so this seems to me to take all of what we might have had call it a housing commission or housing authority or something like that. It takes all of those functions and assumes all of those functions. And I just wanted to confirm, is there anything left we might need a housing commission or housing authority for as far as the district goes?
Perhaps not.
CAO.
Thank you, Mayor Elliott. There is the recommendation or option in the Macola work that indicates that over time, as it grows, that we could transfer into the housing authority, but this is the first step at this time. So, in other words, there's no rush. I don't know, Gary, if you want to speak more to that?
It's possible that we could still form a housing corporation and pull back from the partner agreement on the third-party units. It's probably unlikely. This is probably an indication that we're going to move to a single entity, whether or not we form a housing corporation and Sea to Sky merge with that, or we assign this to Sea to Sky and they morph into a housing authority. I just don't see there being multiple entities that manage this issue in the community. So there may still be a housing corporation, but I would see that it's in conjunction with others in the community.
Yeah, I didn't mean to suggest we should still have one. I frankly sit here thinking, why would we bother at this point? Because this seems to be the perfect solution to it, but I'll leave for comments.
Councilor Pettingill, Councilor Stoner.
So, for me, between Centerpoint and this, it seems like it's a big increase in Sea to Sky Community Services operations. You know, that businesses are finding it challenging to find employees and so on. Have we taken a look at, or have they, to make sure that they can accommodate this sort of growth in operational responsibility?
I would assume yes, because that was the intent of the request expression of interests. And the business model that the Buckley project runs on in terms of the rental revenue and how that project works is very clear in the application to BC Housing. So will they have to ramp up? Yes, but that's part of the Buckley project. There's money in that to allow that to happen.
Councilor Stoner, then Councilor Hooper.
So the wording in the resolution is that any affordable housing units dedicated to the district by third parties get transferred over. Does that include market rental units, or is it just units that are earmarked as affordable?
It could perhaps be both. If a developer wishes to have those operated by Sea to Sky, or if they wanted to have them operated by Sea to Sky, that may be also dependent on Sea to Sky, because they have a social enterprise model, for lack of a better word. They may not want to take those on, but it's not impossible that could happen.
Councilor Hooper.
With Sea to Sky Community Services being our sort of de facto housing authority, and Chris touched on one of my questions was operational capacity, which we're assuming they have, but they put themselves forward for this. Once they've taken control, what are our abilities and our obligation as far as oversight goes? If there's down the road, there's something goes off the rails, I don't know what that could be, but once we've handed over this, what we hold on to influence it if needed?
I guess we would want to look at the operating agreement between BC Housing and Sea to Sky to make sure that that met our interests. I have no doubt that it will, but I can certainly ensure that that happens.
That's sort of for the follow-up, that's sort of in part of, assumed to be part of the transitional time is setting up this mechanism.
I'm sorry?
That's sort of what would be happening in the transitional time between, as we hand over the responsibilities through the build-out of, we put that.
Yeah, I'm not sure what the timing is for that partner agreement to be completed, but I would suspect it's within the next 6 months, so that both parties have an understanding of what they're into at the end of the process. The application, I should note in terms of resourcing, the application to BC Housing had a financial model that had, I want to say, a half FTE for management and additional resources for building operations and maintenance, and then the requisite funds for replacement, repairs. So all of that funding is in the Buckley project financial model, which we're going to refine over the next year.
I have a few questions. With the funding not being available, the capital funding for the youth hub, I'm trying to remember the design, but isn't the youth hub providing some supporting walls to this building? Like, isn't it tacked underneath?
Yes, so I mean, theoretically, you could remove the youth hub and nothing changes in the building. There is a void on the bottom because you cannot.
You can't put habitable space there.
Yes, so that's why I'm not seeing that we're at a huge financial risk here, because if we say, okay, the youth hub is out, they're still going to have to build essentially the same building. They might be able to remove some of the walls, but then you're going to replace it with parking. So the costs are going to be the same.
Do we have any leverage here, Mr. Buxton, to ask for that back in or to have a justification? I mean, currently Sea to Sky is the operator of our youth center, which is at the end of its life. So this was seen as an opportunity to meet two goals. And so do we have any leverage here to?
Yes, because BC Housing have asked us to provide a rationale for how we should assign those costs. So that's what we intend to do.
Okay.
Those are not going to be significant from my point of view.
Okay. So we're still working.
Yes, and I should note that all of it, we've been very clear with Sea to Sky and Ministry of Child and Family Development and Vancouver Coastal Health, is that the tenant improvements are going to have to come from, the costs of those are going to have to come from somebody else. So what happens within that shell, we've always been clear, is that that's got to come, that capital fund, those capital funds have to come from the people who want to use that space.
So we do have an advocate in Sea to Sky Community Services as well.
Yes.
With BC Housing on that piece. Okay. Just so I'm clear on the ownership of the building, we basically hand over the lease, but the land remains ours and the building technically remains ours, because at the end of the lease we could always get it back.
Yes, I think the easiest way of describing it is that while the lease is in operation and the operating agreement with BC Housing is in operation, the building is essentially the property of Sea to Sky Community Services.
Do we have any residual risk there if the building comes back to us in 60 years because no one wants it?
Are you looking to me? Thank you. Mayor Elliott, that'll be part of the lease discussions and language as to how they have to present the building back or if they have to maintain it to certain standards. I think that'll be dealt with through the leasing agreements.
Yes, I think most leasing agreements have a certain expectation
around the improvements.
that the property is returned in a usable fashion, but we would probably be at that point redeveloping the building or renegotiating the lease.
Okay. My last question is, aren't we still waiting for a report from Macola on the long-term governance options for affordable housing? I thought we were still waiting to hear from them.
No, the recommendations were contained in that report that we dealt with on, now I've lost it. It would have been November 20th, yeah. Their recommendations with respect to how we should proceed were in that report.
I'm in thinking over the long term, when I think of a housing authority or a governance model, it's not just receiving, but it's also a proactive partner who is out there seeking out those next opportunities. So that responsibility is taken away from the district, and there's someone that is actively pursuing those opportunities and unique models to deliver housing. I would want to be sure if we're going to hand over units to Sea to Sky Community Services that we're entertaining not just the short term, but how we see the housing authority and the services it provides over the long term. And I'm not sure that I have that comfort level at this point, that we've got someone who would be a proactive partner. So I'm a little bit nervous about that part of the motion at this point without understanding the capacity of Sea to Sky Community Services to fulfill what I think our community imagines a housing authority does. When we think about what Whistler Housing Authority does.
Yeah, so what I can say at this point, I'll broach that issue as part of the discussions of the negotiation on the partner agreement and see. That may be a memorandum of understanding in addition to a partner agreement with respect to how we might choose together to address those issues in the longer term.
Councillor Race, then Councillor Anderson.
Yeah, I mean, just on that point, I'm wondering if that really takes the district completely out of it. Not that we need a housing commission or a housing authority, but for example, it's this council and staff that primarily go out and negotiate with developers to get these new units coming on. As new developments come out, we get those in the zoning process. And there would be nothing stopping us if it was still a priority in our community, us as a council or future councils, from going out and facilitating another Buckley Avenue, something like that, whatever the next one might look like. I think that could still, if we thought that was a community need, we could still do that and go through the same process of assigning it to somebody to get our name off the mortgage. Personally, I don't see anything that stops us from doing that. The partnering agreement, from my perspective, is a management contract. They're just taking over the management. Taking over the long-term lease of Buckley Avenue, but when we look at these individual sub-market units that come out of developments that we get control over, or whichever ones we get control over, and some of them we don't necessarily get control over, but the management of it can go to Sea to Sky as a property manager, and they can hire somebody with manager expertise to handle it. So I personally don't see that problem. I think we're still, as a council, probably going to still want to be out there gathering up these units to give to them. But from my perspective, going back to my first question, the actual management function, I think we are handing over to somebody else. Which personally I didn't see a problem with. Assuming we have confidence in Sea to Sky, and I do.
I suppose my question was about management plus. And I'm not sure that I feel that it's a municipal government's role to be out hustling the next land deal. I think we have a CAC policy that acquires units, which we can hand over to someone to manage, but we've seen how much time it takes our staff to manage a project like this. And affordable housing technically is a senior level government responsibility. And if you had an arm's length partner that was doing that work on behalf of the district, that's the capacity I want to explore with a partner. Because yes, it's our job to facilitate. I'm not sure it's our job to make it happen all the time. And that's why I wanted to explore that opportunity long term. If there's a partner we can work with that can provide both management and the proactive project development piece.
Yes, during the last staff report on the 20th, when we dealt with that report from McCullough, what I suggested there was three options going forward. One was a freestanding corporation, one was a sort of a collaborative or on our own approach. The second one was a collaborative approach, and I think that's what you're seeking for me to do, is to start that conversation at the same time. there's nods from I will do that.
Yeah, I'll go to Councillor Anderson in a second. I know we've had this debate about you need a certain number of units in order to have something to manage. I want to make sure we're having this partnership discussion with the long term in mind, because this issue isn't going to go away. And I want to make sure that we're not going to burden ourselves with always having to be hustling when potentially there's an arm's length relationship that we could develop that allows someone else to do that in very close collaboration with us, but it's not our primary role. We could provide land, we can waive fees, we do what we need to do and stay within our mandate around affordable housing, and someone else
Understood.
takes on your role.
I'd like to do that.
Councillor Anderson and then Councillor Stoner.
I'd just like to refer to the recommendation, or a key one, the key one, of the Housing Options Group Strategic Framework from 2014, which refers to the need for a coordinating entity. We didn't attach the label. I was a member of the committee of the Housing Authority, but we certainly had it in mind. There's a variety of functions we saw that were necessary that that entity could be responsible for, distinct from or in addition to property development and management. So liaison, proactive thinking, market monitoring, planning, looking for funding and new ideas. And Worcester Housing Authority has always done these things in addition to managing and developing property. So I just think it doesn't need to be district-led, but I think there's still a need out there for some kind of a coordinating entity.
Agreed. Councillor Stoner.
Yeah, I'll just follow up on that, and I think Mayor Elliott's comments speak a little bit more to my original question of whether this also includes the market rental units and differentiating that from the affordable units. And I think that those, having a longer term vision of how we manage those market rental units as well, creating a more wholesome picture is really important. I think that that is not necessarily captured in this particular proposal for a partnership agreement. And with regards to our discussion that came out from the November 20th meeting, we did have that more fulsome conversation around what is that level, what is the magic number of units that we need to make a standalone entity a little bit more feasible. And I think that that was the context under which we had described moving forward with that recommendation to find a partnership agreement in the interim until we reach that kind of threshold of viable units.
Correct.
Councillor Pettingill.
Yeah, I think, from my perspective, what's proposed here and what we've talked about fits fairly well into CSI Community Services wheelhouse. I can imagine some of the units benefiting from some of the other services they provide, and so for me, this is a good fit. This building is a good fit, but more broadly, I sort of understood the conversation in November was that we were going to leave ourselves with options going forward and find a way to make this project work, but if possible, we wanted some flexibility on how we more generally proceed with the housing authority. Or such an entity.
So is there a way I can amend the recommendation, Mr. Buxton, that makes that a little more clear?
If I could, I would suggest a subsequent one after between 1 and 2 is something to the effect of the District of Squamish Council direct staff to direct staff to discuss a memorandum of understanding with Sea Sky Community Services regarding long-term partnerships and collaboration. I don't know if that's getting towards the issue that you're...
Possibly. Let me think about that. Councillor Rice, Councillor French.
Yeah, and my recollection was it was 100 units or somewhere thereabouts. That was the critical mass for such a project. We may get market units, or that entity might get market units, but so far what we've seen, my sense of it is that most of the developers will actually manage their own market units. It's the sub-market units that you would probably get control of that might be taken over. But to the issue here, I think then what we're looking for is an interim partnering agreement with the understanding that once we get to a certain number of units, we have the option of setting up our own system and assigning it back or terminating the partnering agreement. Not Buckley Avenue, but the other units that we get control of. Something along that line. I don't have wording for recommendation, but I think that was, coming back to me now, I think that was maybe the intent. We weren't specific about that. I don't think we got into a specific discussion, but in the context of this resolution, we just say in the first line, negotiate an interim partnering agreement, which maybe with certain amount of notice may be terminated by the district. And the MOU can set out when we might want to do that.
Certainly, I understand the intent, so if the first motion is to negotiate an interim partnering agreement, I can then come back and I can provide you sort of a reasonable, it should be 3 years, it should be 5 years to make any sense. I understand the intent. My intent in sort of roughly crafting that second motion was to deal with the longer term beyond the interim, and I think an MOU would be the best way of doing that at this point, given how loose the concepts might be. Certainly towards collaboration around ongoing project development, some of those issues that Councillor Anderson raised from the framework that I will crib. I think I have a clear understanding of where Council wants to go with this.
And I'm not sure of the wording of the expression of interest, but also we may want to leave open the option of putting this out to RFP once we get to that level.
I think we always have that opportunity.
So hence the word interim or something like that. So is that the best way to proceed, is to add the word interim partnering agreement?
Yes, if it's interim, then to me it's time limited and it has termination provisions so that we all know that this is not forever. And assignment provisions so that if we want to move this to somebody else, we can do that.
Any other comments, Council, on that, or sorry, I'll go to you.
If I might, Mayor Elliott, a question to Mr. Buxton, to your point around the wording of the expression of interest. We're talking about an MOU that includes more than this management, sort of proactive liaison outreach to project planning, etc. Does that still honor the expression of interest, or is there a risk there?
Now, the expression of interest really deals with bullet points 2 and 3 here.
Right.
So no, it would not. It's beyond the scope of the RFEOI, so it wouldn't affect it. It would be something supplementary.
That was kind of my question. I'm sorry, at risk of entering into Councillor debate, is that because it's beyond the scope, does that, like, are we changing the terms of what we're looking for to the extent that someone else may have said, oh, well, I would have expressed my interest?
No, I don't believe so.
That's where I'm coming from, is that we may miss an opportunity to have other partners at the table, and also that it may not have been Sea to Sky's understanding that there was maybe a bigger long-term picture that included the things that Councillor Anderson listed off from the housing study in 2014. This Councillor Stoner and then Councillor Herford. Are you in there somewhere? Yeah. Councillor French? Oh yeah, you were there. Sorry. Councillor French, then Stoner, then Herford.
I'm feeling like we should be treating this on its own as the Buckley project. And the bigger conversation is a conversation to have another day. That is the big question.
Councillor Stoner, thoughts?
I think I agree a little bit with what Councillor French is saying. My one hesitation there is I think that we have some units coming online that we might need support for partnering agreement sooner rather than later. So I just wanted to clarify that the interim what we're proposing for the adding the word interim is specifically for the partnership agreement with regards to the additional affordable housing units, but not with respect to the Buckley Avenue.
Correct. Buckley Avenue is a long-term.
The long-term.
Yeah. Councilor Herford?
Along the same line, I was curious about when we had the wording of interim and discussion of timeline. You come back at that time with that time frame when we adjust that for
Yeah, I'm reluctant to say interim means 3 years, 5 years, 2 years. At this point, I'd like to be able to sit down and discuss that with Cedar Sky.
I'm very open to them sort of earning the accepting and earning the more expanded role that we seem to be envisioning for this entity. So I think it's could be a good starting point. I'm curious about the term that ends up being palatable for everybody.
Councilor Rice?
Yeah, I was going to make a suggestion that we deal with the ones that don't seem to be contentious, which is bullet points 2, 3, and 4, which relate to Buckley Avenue. And then we can sort of discuss really what we're talking about is how we get into a partnering arrangement and perhaps for how long and what's around it. But if that was acceptable, I'll move bullet points 2, 3, and 4.
Anybody want to second that? Seconded by Councilor Stoner.
And I'll just comment briefly on it. For me, this is a perfect solution because the difficulty we had with the district being sort of an operator is our name would be on the mortgage. And even though there's backing and there's cash flow and so forth, and we don't expect taxpayers to pay anything, it ate up a lot of our borrowing power. We had that discussion about capacity. And there's around a $13 or $14 million mortgage in this project, and that would eat up that much borrowing power. So this, for me, is a perfect solution to that because it gets the mortgage out of our name and into the name of Sea to Sky, so it doesn't affect our borrowing power. And so that's why I'm really happy to see this. This takes care of that project for us and takes care of that problem we had. So I'm happy to support that part.
Any other comments? We'll call the question. Oh, sorry. Councilor Cunningham?
I was just going to ask, do we have any indication that that first bullet was important to Sea to Sky Community Services?
Well, we can come back.
We're going to come back to it.
Oh.
It's just a motion to get these three settled because there's no contentious issues around them. So on the last three bullets, I'll call the question. All those in favor? Opposed? Motion carries. So now we can deal with the first bullet. Councilor Cunningham.
So, do we have any indication that first bullet was important to Sea to Sky Community Services?
It's important to us. There have been some, I have regular discussions with Sea to Sky. They're aware of it, the level of importance. I'm not sure. It's more important to us because to have somewhere to land when those units arrive, when they're ready for occupancy. It's a lot of work for me to go out of it, for my successor or whoever's in this role, to go out and find an operator. If I have to do that for each time units come in, it's a lot of work. To have somewhere to automatically land those units, so to speak, would be very helpful to us.
So can I make a recommendation that the motion read that the District of Squamish direct staff to negotiate an interim partner agreement with Sea to Sky Community Services Society regarding any affordable housing units dedicated to the district by third parties, and and come back to council with suggestions on a longer term process to fulfill the proactive housing governance model.
Okay.
Does that make sense?
Yes.
So then we separate the two things. We get what we need, which is in a partnering agreement, so those units can go over to Sea to Sky in the short term. And staff can come back to us with a fair and equitable process for determining how we get to that longer term model.
Understood. Absolutely.
Anybody want to second that? Already in motion? Sorry, Simon. Councilor Stoner seconds. Any discussion? Councilor Hunter?
I just wonder, sorry, a question. With the affordable housing units, just the language in there, do we need to keep the affordable in there for the scale? Anything that we, if the control comes to us, we have somewhere to land it, and does that address the scale from heavily subsidized through to where we're comfortable stepping back from the market? Or like where, is that a mandatory piece of it? I understand that the affordability is the most important thing of this whole thing, but does that limit us in any way with that language?
I don't think so in the short term. Because the market rentals, we know that the developers will manage on their own. It's these ones that require income testing and selection of tenants and all that work that goes into that they don't want to manage, we don't want to manage.
Also make sure that we were catching what that it was encompassing what we wanted to catch. So I'm fine with that.
I think the market units would probably be a business decision for Cedar Sky as to whether or not we want to take them on. That issue has recently come up with them. They do have a particular sort of social enterprise model, and that, depending on the nature of those rental units, it may not be in their wheelhouse, but it may if it's very close to market, but if it's very high value, it's probably not in their wheelhouse and probably not in their interest, unless they change their business model to take on a different sort of profile, and that they do take on units that might yield perhaps a greater revenue to them. I don't think that's in their wheelhouse right now, but I shouldn't speak for them.
My concern is just capturing enough of the spectrum to accomplish what we want to accomplish, which is affordability.
I'm comfortable with that.
Yeah, and just on that point, I mean, I'm not sure that we as a district are going to get control of any of those market units in any event. I mean, I can't recall from any of the discussions we've had on the rezoning was how they would somehow come to us to actually manage the rental of them. They'll either be managed by the developer or they sell them in bulk if it's a totally rental building and it's sold in bulk to the next owner. Or in the case of some of those, they'll be sold as a sub-market unit for essentially a sub-market price based on the cash flow, and the next owner will manage it. And so with covenants that it has to be rented and so forth, but you know, it's not the kind of thing that we're going to get control over largely. So I think you know, this is fine. I doubt we'll see any of the market units.
So the motion's been seconded. I'll call a question. All those in favor? Thank you, Mr. Roth.
Thank you.
Next up, appointment of animal control and bylaw enforcement officer.
So, this is me. Natasha was unable to join us this evening, and similarly Chris. So Chris Baker is a new employee with the District of Squamish in our bylaw team, and the legislation council needs to appoint anyone that's an animal control officer or bylaw enforcement officer. Just some brief background on Chris, which is very interesting, is he's coming to us. He worked previously in Whistler as a senior bylaw officer there, and also, I found this kind of compelling, worked for NATO in Bosnia doing protective work. So I think we're in good hands. No.
So council, we need a motion to appoint Chris Baker as an animal control officer for the district pursuant to the community charter, and that Chris be appointed as a bylaw enforcement officer for the district of Squamish pursuant to the community charter. Moved by Councilor Herford, seconded by Councilor French. All those in favor? Opposed? Motion carries. Welcome, Chris. Look forward to meeting you. Regular business meeting schedule amendment. So I think what we did when we put our council up is we had the dates incorrect for a conference for new councilors that is coming up in January. And so what we're doing is amending the schedule to cancel the meeting on January 15th. Which is a Tuesday. we meeting on Monday?
On the 14th, yes, for a budget workshop.
We are.
For 3 hours, 9 to noon.
No, we're canceling the regular meeting. And I think there's also a 5th Tuesday in January that we might use. So have no fear, council. You're not really missing today. A motion to that effect, moved by Councilor Herford, seconded by Councilor French. All those in favor? Opposed? Motion carries. We now have a consent agenda, which includes minutes and correspondence. If anybody is in conflict on any of these items, they should declare that conflict, and we'll pull them from the consent agenda.
Pull them item?
From the consent agenda?
Yes.
Yes.
That's number 9 in the correspondence from Mr. Dale Harrison, the Northern Woods and Water Highway Association.
Okay. So we'll pull that, and that gets dealt with under
requested.
Under 12A. Okay. Anything else? Okay, seeing none, can I have a motion to approve the consent agenda? Moved by Councilor Stoner, seconded by Councilor Race. All those in favor? Opposed? Motion carries. We have a late agenda item, so we have gone through the community enhancement grants and made preliminary decisions, and these are reflected in our agenda. They are done in groups, council, and recognizing that some of you are in conflict on some of them, so we're going to go through them. I'm not going to read them all out to the community, but they are in the agenda and the amounts that are preliminarily approved here. So recommendations from the December 11th Committee of the Whole, Community Enhancement Grant Process 2018. These are for the cash grants, which covers the Air Squadron Cadets, PCSPCA, Big Brothers, Greater Vancouver, Canadian Adaptive Planning Society, Technos Foundation, Community Foundation, Cutting Barriers, Farmers Market, Food Bank, Helping Hands, Hospice Society, Men's Shed, Nonprofit Network, Sea to Sky Community Services, Volunteer Daughters for Cancer, and Watershed Society. A motion, please. Moved by Councilor Stoner, seconded by Councilor Race. All those in favor? Motion carries. The next is the in-kind non-cash grants. Council approved the following grants in kind to the BC Whippet Racing Club, Brackendale Farmers Institute, Hassan Women's Center, Logger Sports. You're in conflict on that one.
Yeah, how does that work? Do we pull that one out when we vote on the?
Yeah, we could just pull that.
It is actually a typo because it has been pulled out at the end. The in-kind is the last motion.
Okay.
So we're just going to strike that. It's not going to be, can we amend that? House Sound Women's Center, Mampcomb River Access Society, Pirate Swim Club, Youth Triathlon. Moved by Councilor Ray, seconded by Councilor Anderson. All those in favor? Opposed? Motion carries. Then the next group is those that requested cash and in-kind grants. The council approved the following grants in kind and cash to the Downtown PIA, the Rebuild Society, and the Senior Center Society. Moved by Councilor Stoner, seconded by Councilor Herford. All those in favor? Opposed? Motion carries. Okay, the next three, we know we have councilors in conflict. Council, you will need to declare your conflict when you leave the table. So the first up is the Squamish Climate Action Network. Councilor Stoner.
I will be repeating myself because I'm an immediate past board member of the Squamish Climate Action Network.
Thank you. Councilor Anderson.
As an immediate past director of Squamish Climate Action Network, I will excuse myself from this one.
Hey, do you want to recuse yourself from the next one as well? So we
I'll
don't
do
bring
that
it back?
as well. So as a member of the Environmental Conservation Society, I will excuse myself for that as well.
Thank you. So, council, for the Squamish Climate Action Network, that council grant 8,000 to the Climate Action Network. Moved by Councilor Ray, seconded by Councilor Herford. All those in favor? Opposed? Motion carries. Suggest Councilor Stoner only to come back in. Okay, next up is the Environmental Conservation Society that council grant 3,000 to the society. Moved by Councilor Stoner, seconded by Councilor French. All those in favor? Opposed? Motion carries. While we bring in Councilor Anderson, Councilor Herford.
Yeah, conflict on this Squamish Days application. I'm not a member of the board, but I mascot for this particular event they're discussing here, so back.
Thank you. Council Lager Sports, the council grants in kind to Lager Sports Squamish Days $5,267.74. Moved by Councilor Stoner, seconded by Councilor Pettingill. All those in favor? Opposed? Motion carried. Thank you, Ms. Buxton. Correspondence, action requested. Councilor Anderson, do you want to speak to the letter that you pulled from the consent agenda?
Yes, we received a letter from Dale Harrison of the Northern Woods and Water Highway Association, and I'd just like to observe that the target audience for this initiative, in fact, includes travelers on the Sea Sky Highway and traveling from here to Northern BC and Alberta. And so I would like to recommend that this letter be referred to Tourism Squamish in case it hasn't already come to their attention.
You don't want to deal with the membership piece, you just want to refer it to Squamish?
That's correct, yes.
Okay. So move that the letter from the Northern Woods and Water Highway Association be forwarded to Tourism Squamish for their information. Moved by Councilor Anderson, second by Councilor Stoner. All those in favor? Opposed? Motion carries. Next up, we have a letter from a student who was asking for action on the Brenham Park skate park, so that we refer this letter to the Director of Recreation for consideration of Brenham Park funding. Moved by Councilor French, seconded by Councilor First.
Comment?
Yes, please comment.
Very much appreciate the forwarding this to the Director of Recreation. I want to recognize that we received a whole slew of letters from a bunch of high school students, many of which were related to items with regards to Brenham Park. And if those could be compiled and sent as one for consideration to the Director of Recreation.
Where did we receive them?
We received them back in, it was our first meeting.
November.
Those were sort of election congratulatory ones, but also had a bunch of suggestions, and they were mostly better for us. Is that what you're thinking?
Yeah.
How do we do that? How do we go back in time to grab letters from?
You can pass a motion.
Okay.
Or maybe when we just forward this one, that we can highlight that there was additional letters that were sent.
Okay. So maybe we'll change the motion. Oh wait, we already voted on it, didn't we?
No.
Oh. So maybe we could amend the motion that this letter be forwarded along with the letters that were received by council. Do you remember was it November 20th? Is our regular business meeting?
That would be the only one we would have.
Yeah. And related letters from November 20th to the Director of Recreation for consideration in the Brenham Park plan. Is that okay with those that moved and seconded? All right, I'll call the question. All those in favor? Opposed? Motion carries. Doug, you may want to speak to this one. So the Ocean Watch Task Force, that the District of Squamish continue to support the Ocean Watch Task Force with planning staff and council member attendance at meetings.
Yeah, this, and I'm one of the co-chairs, and that's why my signatures on that letter was sent out. The thing that triggered it, of course, was the election, because several of the people that were on it before, for different reasons, didn't run for re-election. But I was appointed about 1.5 years ago now. Originally, it was supposed to be a 6-month appointment, but the job has kind of kept on going, and the projects are still there, and so it's now a bit more ongoing. But I do serve at the pleasure of council, so I think what I'd be looking for is either appointing me or appointing a successor. The staff person at the moment is Sarah McJaniff, and that's typically, in my experience, that's been a decision of senior staff as to who they will designate to be the support person, so I don't believe we have to deal with that in a resolution.
The primary work of this task force right now is the
Marine reference guide.
marine reference guide, as you saw on the agenda. Are you happy to continue to serve?
For the time being. Or you can fire me.
I'll nominate.
Moved by Councillor Herbert that Councillor Race continue to serve on the Ocean Watch Task Force, seconded by Councillor Stoner. All those in favor? Opposed? Motion carries.
Thank you.
You're in, Doug. Councillor Race, sorry. We have a letter about weekly compost, which we will refer to the budget discussion. Moved by Councillor French, seconded by Councillor Stoner. All those in favor? Opposed? Motion carries. And the last one, this is a letter that came from Capilano University, that we send a letter of support to the Minister Chen about expanding the early childhood care and education program in the Sea to Sky corridor. There is certainly a great need for childcare in Squamish, and we don't have currently a local education provider to provide the training to the staff. So, moved by Councillor French, seconded by Councillor Herford. All those in favor? Opposed? Motion carries. We'll get that letter off. We have minutes to approve with recommendation from the December 4th Committee of the Whole Squamish Estuary Restoration Project. And we support the modifications to the Squamish River Train Berm, and that District of Squamish establish a maintenance agreement with provincial province and Fisheries and Oceans Canada for new infrastructure prior to accepting any maintenance responsibility. After this one at a time, don't we?
You mean just this one, backed up? Yeah, one at a time.
Okay. Moved by Councillor Stoner, seconded by Councillor Race. All those in favor? Opposed? Motion carries. This is from the meeting on December 4th about the letter of intent, the industry innovation program, that the District of Squamish enter into a letter of intent in the form attached to the report on December 4th. To develop a Squamish Industry Innovation Program with the Faculty of Communication, Art and Technology of Simon Fraser University, the Creative and Applied Learning Studio of Quest University, and the Squamish Chamber of Commerce. Moved by Councillor French, seconded by Councillor Herford. All those in favor? Opposed? Motion carries. And lastly, that the district prepare a grant application for the development of the Wellness and Arts Centre at Brennan Park under the Investing in Canada Infrastructure Program. I'll bring back to Council for endorsement. We'll see that early in the new year. Moved by Councillor Herford, seconded by Councillor Stoner. All those in favor? Opposed? Motion carries. Any business arising from the minutes? Seeing none? We have committee minutes and reports. So that council received the minutes from the November 15th Advisory Design Panel meeting for information. Moved by Councillor Anderson, seconded by Councillor Stoner. All those in favor? Opposed? Motion carries. We have minutes from the Smoke Block Park Select Committee, November 29th, moved by Councillor Stoner, seconded by Councillor Herford. All those in favor? Opposed? Motion carries. And the Public Arts Select Committee minutes of December 5th, moved by Councillor French, seconded by Councillor Anderson. All those in favor? Opposed? Motion carries. Recommendations from the December 5th Public Arts Select Committee that a temporary public art coordinator be appointed. That staff review the possibility of relocating the remaining funds in the minor projects budget to the public art coordinator temporary position. I was curious about this one, Councillor French. Can you just speak to it? What this role is for?
Does it have to be a seconder before I do that, or can I just launch into it?
You can launch into it, and then I'll let you do the motion.
Okay. So this select committee has money and surplus money. And the thought of the committee members was that if there was a way to inject some of this group's surplus money into this position, it might be a good to start with.
Okay, this is for staff review. I'm not quite sure how this works because it's like adding to our operating budget. I'm not sure it's within the terms of reference of those funds, but anyway,
Um,
we don't need
Mayor-
to discuss it here, but. it should
Mayor
come
Elliott,
back.
I would suggest that a resolution will not necessarily make this effective into the budget or not. So it's probably just as well, even if you passed it, it would have to be deferred to budget discussions and we can bring back information at that time. Generally, we manage the public art fund with an operating line that we then drop to its own accumulated surplus, with the intent that that's supposed to form public art, future art purchases. Whether or not this is the proper use within those terms of reference, we'd have to review.
We'll go back and check. Okay, thank you. So we'll review, that staff review the possibility. Moved by Councillor French, seconded by Councillor Stoner. All those in favor? Opposed? Motion carries. There's no unscheduled public attendance. Any open question period clarification related to what we covered tonight, Stephen?
It's pretty common.
Okay, it's late, so we're not answering that. Any council or staff announcements?
Do you want me to provide an update on regional transit? Or is that
Council, any updates? No events? Councilor Herbert?
It's actually been a really busy season, as everyone knows, and trying to go back as to when I gave the last update. But one of the highlights for me over the last little while is I attended House Sound Secondary's Winter Gala, and it was put on by their band, and we've got some very talented students there, and the staff and the students put together an amazing show, and apparently it's an annual event, and it's the first time that I've been, but I will be returning. So it was great, and encourage everyone to take advantage of every opportunity to see live music in Squamish. It's happening. I won't go into the rest of all the holiday events, but Christmas cheer is out there. So.
Any other announcements, Councilor Penny?
Well, just highlight two things on Sunday. Councillor Herford actually led and co-organized a really nice community carol event, and there was a tree and kids, and it was pouring rain, but everyone found some shelter and spent quite a while singing, and it was very Christmassy and nice. And then I went right from there to the Brackendale Art Gallery, and Cam Soleil put on his annual Christmas concert with all of his students, and sort of reinforced for me the need to really think about what facilities we have for arts in Squamish, because the talent coming out of Squamish, the youth, is just incredible. So it's a great event.
Councilor Anderson?
On Thursday this week, the shipping day for the Squamish Community Care Program takes place. That is, all of the deliveries to the communities throughout the district and a little bit beyond. And we often need helpers as swampers. It will be tight at the location, will be the Squamish Community Church on Buckley. But we usually have enough drivers, but we often have just the drivers and the cars showing up needing a helper. So if any of you may be available to help out with the swamping duties for some of the deliveries. Also, we often have recycling chores during the course of the day because we're overwhelmed with cardboard and Christmas wrapping paper and so on. But it's a wonderful event to drop by and just have a look and see a very busy bunch of people reaching out to several hundred families for Christmas.
Councilor Wilson. I had the pleasure on Wednesday last week of conducting the swearing-in ceremony for the new chamber board. There were 2 council candidates that have been sworn into the chamber board. So it's good to see that the candidates, not all of them, just disappear after the election. I was glad to see that. It was a great event. Looking forward to our ongoing collaboration with the chamber And then after that, I was at the downtown BIA event, celebrating the holiday cheer with them, and it was great to see our downtown businesses coming together and reminding everyone to buy local. It saves you on gas. That's all I have. So with that, motion to close. Motion to terminate. Moved by Councilor Reyes, seconded by Councilor French. All those in favor? Opposed? Motion carries.